Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. The world is a stage. The world is a stage, y'all. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. We've been very busy with the Los Angeles distraction. And we have forgotten by Elon Musk and Trump their little fallout. But they are distracting us from the end of NATO and World War III, because this is also a World War III alert. Britain specifically has been getting destroyed in Ukraine. A lot of British NATO officers have been killed, and they're distracting us from this. Let's get into that. No, we got to. I don't know what the hell. They don't want y'all to know the end of the empire is here.
Russian retaliation continue, starting in Kiev on the night of June 9th, destroying the former office building that housed the British Visa Center before the Special Operations Zone, Ukrainian media reported. Just the day before, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had made it clear that Russia had proof of the Britain 100% involvement in organizing terrorist attacks by Kiev regime on Russian territory.
He told him he would do this to Britain.
In the morning, footage showed the burned-out British Visa Center, located at Glubochitskaya 4th Street in Lukyanovka district, rendered inoperable after the strike.
This is a little warning to Britain. They keep playing. This what they building. This is what their military sites and their visa sites inside of Britain gonna look like. Not just the ones inside of Ukraine where they was hiding that. And they had all kind of military high-ranking officials in bunkers. Putin know how to find them underground and wipe them out.
Previously, the office building was used as a visa center, but it had been used for other purposes, identified as the Military Business Center, Artem, previously exposed as a key site in Ukrainian missile and UAV programs. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that the combined strike involving drones and missiles targeted aviation, missile, armored, and shipbuilding industries in Kiev. The attack was designed to weaken Ukrainian military infrastructure and disrupt the production and repair of key weapon systems.
All these people are getting terrorized night after night after night. They're trying to distract us with Los Angeles. Ukraine, salute, big bro.
More footage that night, disturbing the sleeping of Kievans, but they have understood. It seems that it's time for Iskander and Garin to return to the skies, and it appears to be the largest attack the capital has ever seen. Dozens of Garin 2 were involved, and appeared to be aggressively attacking with their
people. I reported that Trump told NATO officials and soldiers, leave Ukraine. Putin already told them what he was finna do. They trying to hide underground. They didn't want to leave. Okay, then you won't die.
High-pitched cries, shaking up targets at strategic locations in and around Kiev. Geranium successfully struck an armored vehicle repair and technical base, a facility known to store and service heavy weaponry, including tanks and other armored platforms.
Bad news.
Meanwhile, for Iskander-M ballistic missiles, 2 Iskander-K cruise missiles made their landings, plunging parts of Kiev into darkness. According to satellite heat detection data and official reports, the Russian night raid targeted 7 districts of the capital. Other confirmed locations include the former polymer industrial complex, historically involved in the production of chemicals and materials, which Ukrainian sources have attempted to disguise. Next, the maintenance and repair base of the Ukhrechflot fleet, an inland shipping company that supports military logistics. The Darnitsa Central Locomotive Depot, a rail-based military transport strategy east of Kiev. Also, the Boryspil Oil Depot, a key fuel hub, which supports Ukrainian military operations near the capital. Kiev woke up in the morning in the smoke of oil fire. The city itself is covered in fire and smoke for more than 10 hours, hit by one of the largest attacks. Helicopters were deployed to take water and dropped more than 120 tons of water to extinguish the fire, which was also extinguished from the ground. According to the expert, It is time for Zelensky to crawl back to Putin and beg for mercy. It is worth noting that in 2022 in Istanbul, Putin had given Zelensky very good conditions, much better than now. However, Zelensky refused them because he and his circle, the EU and US military complex, want to profit from the war.
See what happened? See what happened? They was laughing on TV about blowing up some Russian bombers, and they had humiliated Russia. That's what I had heard. They were saying that. Are they still laughing? Salute, family. This is very humiliating for NATO, for the US. That's why they got their little looters riding in Los Angeles. They don't move out there like not talk about what's really going on.
A few hours ago, the Russian Defense Ministry officially confirmed that on the night of June 10, the Russian Aerospace Forces, together with missile units, launched another massive missile attack on military installations of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces in Ukraine. Moreover, the Russian military has officially stated that all the designated targets have been successfully hit and destroyed. The Russian Defense Ministry also commented on the spectrum of weapons used during this missile attack. According to the Russian military, on the night of June 10, Russia used dozens of Iskander-M and Iskander-K ballistic missiles, as well as Kalibr and Kh-101 cruise missiles. In addition, during this attack, Russian missile forces also used hundreds of kamikaze drones, such as Geranium and Gerbera.
Lord have mercy on the Nazis.
Numerous independent monitoring services have also confirmed this fact. In particular, they stated that on the night of June 10, about 80 powerful explosions were recorded in Ukrainian regions such as Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, and Kiev.
See what all that propaganda.
At the same time, Russian and Ukrainian sources note that most of the missile strikes were recorded in the city of Kiev. Furthermore, Ukrainian, Russian, and Western military experts have already called this missile strike on Kiev the most powerful and massive since the start of the special military operation.
That's what we hear every day.
According to them, explosions in Kiev were recorded in all parts of the
That's how bad it's getting, bro. Every day I show you a video, you hear this is the most devastating. And it'd be the most devastating. That's a bad sign. It's getting worse. Russia up the ante every day until they surrender. Listen, no more hiding on the ground. I keep telling them, bro, that's over with, man. That's over. And when Trump came out and said, yeah, y'all really made Putin mad, you know, he's going to have to hit back. They should have knew the game was up.
The city. These experts note that on the night of June 10, dozens of ballistic and cruise missiles, along with hundreds of kamikaze drones, simultaneously rained down on Kiev. We have never recorded such a massive missile attack on the Ukrainian capital before. Undoubtedly, this missile strike has become the largest and most destructive since the start of the special military operation, military experts noted. Meanwhile, the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, while in an underground bunker, made a video appeal to his so-called Western allies. In this video message, this dead man walking called on the United States, Britain, and the European Union to punish Russia for this massive missile attack on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities as soon as possible. It is important that the United States, the European Union, Britain, and other countries of the world do not turn a blind eye to such Russian missile strikes. We must be united in the fight against Russia. I call on America, which has the power to force Moscow to make peace. Only tough pressure on
They
Russia
don't.
can bring the long-awaited peace, Volodymyr Zelensky said. As for this political clown's calls for the United States to put pressure on Russia for the sake of achieving peace, President Donald Trump bluntly stated that Ukraine's attacks on Russian air bases for strategic aviation had completely unleashed Moscow's hands. According to Donald Trump, Kyiv itself gave Russia a reason to bomb Ukraine to hell. Meanwhile, on the morning of June 10, the first details of the destroyed military installations of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces on the territory of Ukraine began to appear. So, in the Zaporizhia region, in the western part of the city of Zaporizhia, Russian cruise missiles hit 3 weapons depots and a place of temporary deployment of the personnel of the Ukrainian army and foreign mercenaries. It is reliably known that as a result of this attack, 50 Ukrainian soldiers and 20 mercenaries from Eastern, Central, and Western Europe were killed. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, in the southern part of the city of Kryvyi Rog, the Russian military destroyed an armory that was located on the territory of an abandoned confectionery factory. In the Sumy region, Russian uranium kamikaze drones, along with aerial bombs of the Fab family, rained down on enemy forces in settlements such as Pisarevka and Khotin. These settlements are located just 12 kilometers, or 8 miles, from the city of Sumy. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that it is in these settlements that the Ukrainian army and NATO forces are trying to erect defensive lines amid the advancing Russian troops. However, due to the constant strikes by Russian drones, artillery, and combat aviation, it is almost impossible to do this. And finally, in the Kyiv region, in the southwestern part of the city of Bila Tserkva, Russian missiles hit a military airfield and a workshop for the production of parts for unmanned aerial vehicles. In the city of Vyshgorod, Russian kamikaze drones hit a training base of foreign mercenaries and air defense positions. In Kyiv itself, as I said earlier, the largest number of missile strikes has been recorded since February 2022. So, on the night of June 10, Russian ballistic and cruise missiles, together with kamikaze drones, rained down on the Kyiv armored plant. The Russian military also destroyed a repair base and several vessels at a shipyard in the central part of Kyiv. In the western part of the city, Russian missiles rained down on the production facilities of the Ukrainian holding company Artyom, which actively works for the interests of the Ukrainian army. It is also worth noting a targeted missile attack on the building of a business center in the southwestern part of Kyiv. As it turned out, this building housed the headquarters of the British MI6 and several assembly shops, where NATO engineers produced special-purpose drones.
See, that's like hitting the
Commenting on this missile strike, many Russian sources enthusiastically noted the large number of victims among the British terrorists from
They
MI6.
try to hide it.
My dear friends, it is worth noting that the Russian military intensified attacks.
See, you go into regular news, BBC Ukraine, France 24 Ukraine, and that's when they say Russia hit civilian infrastructure. Nah, that's the CIA, Britain's MI6, pretending that they're a business sector in Ukraine. Our Russian, the business was murder, and you got put out of business.
On British forces in Ukraine, immediately after Sergei Lavrov officially announced that the British Special Services, together with the Ukrainian Security Service, had developed and organized terrorist attacks on Russian railways and air bases. By the way, the head of the Russian negotiating group, Vladimir Medinsky, admitted during an interview with American journalist Rick Sanchez that after the terrorist attacks on Russian railways and air bases, Russian citizens demanded that Putin stop negotiations with Ukraine and strike Kyiv and Lviv with Orshnik hypersonic ballistic missiles. At the same time, Vladimir Medinsky acknowledged that negotiating with Ukraine is futile, because this country is entirely subordinate to the West. Against this backdrop, sources in the Russian FSB have confirmed that Ukraine and NATO countries have begun preparing another terrorist attack on Russian territory. Reports indicate that these terrorist attacks are anticipated to transpire at the end of June, coinciding with the forthcoming NATO summit in The Hague.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live show. It's your host, Danny Haifong, and we are, as the reports in Western mainstream media are covering the massive attacks on Kiev, as well as Russia's advances on the front line. So here is what Mr. Medinsky had to say on Rick Sanchez's show.
Indeed, our population, our citizens demand much harsher actions from us. It was very hard for us to go to the second round of negotiations when Ukraine deliberately, on the day of our departure, blew up a passenger train and civilians and children died.
So, Scott, how about we begin with you? Talk about what's been going on. Is this the retaliation? What's been happening in Kiev? There's been several days now of strikes. Russia's defense ministry says they are hitting the defense infrastructure of Kiev really hard at the moment, as well as making advances on the front lines. Is this the response to the bomber attack that occurred now, what was it, a week and a half ago? Talk about what's been going on.
Well, first of all, I just like to point when words matter, and when you see missiles and bombs raining down on Kiev, that implies a lack of precision. Because when I go outside and it's raining down, the rain just landing wherever the hell it wants to land. Every Russian munition is hitting a target that's been carefully selected by the Russian Ministry of Defense to achieve specific outcomes. These are targets that have legitimate military purpose, therefore they're legitimate military target. There's nothing haphazard in what Russia is doing. I believe that what we're seeing right now is the retaliation for the train attacks. Because to retaliate for the drone attack on Russian strategic bombers, Russia needs to reset the notion of strategic deterrence. The Ukraine has violated that, so has Great Britain and to some extent the United States. Sergei Lavrov in a recent statement directly implicates the British and says that American involvement is either similarly direct or through inertia, meaning that it is part of a previous policy that hasn't been brought to an end. That's what I believe is the case here. But be it as it may, the Ukrainian actions violated Russia's published nuclear doctrine in terms of a red line that would trigger a Russian nuclear response. Now, either this doctrine has meaning or it doesn't. I'm not encouraging Russia to use nuclear weapons, far from it. But the Russian retaliation has to be of a scope and scale, and that reestablishes the concept of deterrence, meaning that if you cross this red line, you will pay a price that is disproportional. In such a price that you will never want to even consider doing that again. And I believe that has yet to come. What we're seeing here is a campaign that may unfold over the course of a week or more. And it will culminate in what I believe will be a strategic strike, not of a nuclear nature, but a strategic strike on Ukraine that sends a message, not just to the Ukrainians by inflicting excruciating harm on them, but to the West as well, that this will be and this will be the price that is paid in the future to your cities. Rybkov, the deputy foreign minister of Russia, recently talked about that Russia is about ready to unveil a new generation of weapons. He talked about the expiration of the INF Treaty, America withdrawing from the INF Treaty, but Russia had a moratorium on the deployment of these weapons. But because of the provocations of the West, Russia will be responding, and I believe that response will be in the form of not just Oreshnik, but I believe there's probably going to be at least one and maybe a couple more new generation intermediate range weapons. If you look back on old Soviet doctrine, and the Russians seem to be drawing upon that in the ballistic missile field in terms of their developments, projects that were underway during the Soviet Union were brought to an end because of arms control, or the end of the Soviet Union, mothballed because Russia couldn't afford it, have now been brought back to life. The Oreshnik is one such system. I believe that you'll see a follow-on system similar to a missile developed by the Russians called the Skorost back in the 1980s. The Skorost was a direct response to the Pershing II deployment into West Germany. And the purpose of the Skorost missile was, if the Pershing II left its base and went to the field in an operational manner, the Skorost's job was to rapidly respond and put a missile on that target instantly. And I think you're going to see the Russians fielding something, because we're talking about the potential deployment of the Dark Eagle hypersonic intermediate range system into Europe next year. Russia's going to preempt of that, and we may get an operational demonstration on Ukraine. But either way, I don't think we've seen the response to the attack on the nuclear infrastructure, because that response has to reset the notion of deterrence, and Russia hasn't done that yet.
Yeah. Colonel Wilkerson, would you agree with Scott's assessment, and what's your particular take on the situation?
Yes, I do. And I would add to it that in 2013 and 2014, when we were hearing from the Finns and from others who were observing Russian maneuvers inside Russia through the Center for Naval Analyses and other conduits, we heard the argument and bought the argument ourselves that precision-guided munitions had reached the stage whereby, in this case, Russia truly feared them at that time, because they, in combination, gave the equivalent of a nuclear attack. And Russia at that time felt NATO had an extraordinary advantage in terms of numbers of precision-guided munitions. These are conventional munitions, not nuclear. So I think that's a fair argument. And what Scott has just said is, it's not only a fair argument, their PGM stockpile has increased majorly and gained some even new weight from technological advances and so forth. So they could make the equivalent of a small yield nuclear strike with PGMs. That's my point. My bigger point, that tactical operational point, I agree with Scott on that. My bigger point is that I think we should see now, and Donald Trump, I hope, through the opaque lens he glances at the world through on occasion, needs to see that he is absolutely indispensable to bringing this to a close. And I don't mean because he's head of the empire, but I mean because he's probably the only person, and maybe head of the empire gives him this power, to effect a higher level, if you will, end of the present relationship and beginning of a new relationship. And what I mean there is simply the relationship between Washington and Moscow, which outweighs all of this tactical operational business, no matter how much we may lament the casualties it's creating and how stupid it makes the empire look. And what Trump needs to deal with, over the head of Zelensky if necessary, over the head of his European allies if necessary, is this new relationship with Moscow. And if he has to walk with track shoes over Zelensky's head, and even over Macron and Starmer and Mertz's head, so be it. This needs to take precedence, and it needs to overshadow, if you will, everything else. We need a new relationship with Moscow and Washington, if for no other reason than the existential one of nuclear weapons are getting out of control.
Yeah, Garla, let me bring you in here. Talk about your reaction to the U.S.'s response to all of this, because this conflict it's seemingly far from over in terms of the at least stated promise by Donald Trump to end this conflict as soon as possible, even within 24 hours. But let's just say as soon as possible after he became president.
You know, one of the things I think that we can pick up from the clip that you just showed was that the U.S. Strategies never work against Russia because we don't understand Russia, because we create some boogeyman that this is just a dictatorship and everything is top down, that the leadership of Russia really is only one single dictator that does not respond to the people. And if you'll notice what the person who was being interviewed said, he talked about public outcry. He talked about, he seemed to imply that the government of Russia was kind of pushed into a corner. Not saying that they didn't want to respond, but they had to respond because of public outcry. Now, the strategies of the neocons are always based on an assumption that Putin runs everything, and then he's going to be emotional. Putin's angry, Putin's scared, Putin's upset. The emotions of a single individual, as opposed to a government that has to respond to the public. In fact, one of the things that you can see going on during this conflict, I think that implies that, is that the government has taken had a great concern about their economy, about ensuring that the people in Russia are not suffering economically, that their stores are not empty, et cetera, so that they don't get pushback from people suffering. So what I picked up from this particular clip, I think, was that as long as we assume that this is a dictatorship that does not respond to the public, our plans and strategies will go awry. I think that the one thing I'll add is this, that I think that what we're seeing here is also a change in tactics. I think that a lot of these strikes in Kiev, may be wrong, this is just my opinion, I think that the Ukrainians hid a lot of things, or put a lot of their strategic assets in urban areas and highly populated areas, taking advantage of the fact that the Russians were much less likely to hit targets that were in a highly populated area. I think all the strikes in Kiev shows that one of the things that they're doing is they're saying, okay, we're going to take the gloves off, and if you hide it in a highly populated area, we're going to hit it anyway and let the chips fall where they may. So that's just a couple of things that I thought.
Yeah, Scott, you made a great point earlier about how this is all a reaction, especially to the the passenger train attacks, which actually Mr. Bedinsky mentioned later in the interview. So some have surmised that this war, this conflict, or shall we say special military operation, as Russia calls it, is moving into a counter-terror operation. Do you agree with that? And what would be the implications?
There's political aspects to that and military aspects to that. Politically, I think it's already a counter-terrorist operation because the Russian government has labeled Zelensky and the Zelensky government as a terrorist organization, a terrorist entity, as terrorists themselves. When you have Vladimir Putin making that comment, that is declaratory policy. And I think the political implications that are quite clear, and we've seen them manifested in the Russian presentation in Istanbul, where the Russians have laid out in their conditions for conflict termination a new election that replaces the president, replaces the parliament with something that manifests the will of the Ukrainian people. And only with this newly elected entity can Russia finally conclude peace. And that is a reflection of the fact that Russia views the Ukrainian government as it currently exists as a terrorist entity. So I think politically that decision has been made. Militarily, no, I don't think Russia is going to transition from a special military operation that has very specific goals and objectives to a counter-terrorist operation, which is a completely different ball game from a military standpoint. The objectives would be different, etc. Russia's in the business right now of demilitarizing Ukraine. That's not a counter-terrorist operation objective. This is standard. We're going to kick your ass 3 ways from Sunday. And that's what Russia's doing. They are demilitarizing the old school way. That's closing with and destroying the enemy through firepower, but never shoving a bayonet, except they don't do bayonets anymore, putting a drone up their ass and blowing them up. And Russia is dominating the battlefield in ways that are beyond the imagination and comprehension of people here in the United States. and that Russia's not going to do anything to change that. Denazification is a political objective, but denazification is just another fancy way of talking about anti-terrorism. Because how do you deal with the Nazis? It's the same we deal with the terrorists. You delegitimize them. You write them out of the Constitution. You take them out of the government. So that's already happening. But I don't see the Russian military suddenly waking up and declaring a global war on terror. I think the Russian military is doing what it's doing. What you may see down the future is that this will transition from a special military operation into a state of war. Especially if Ukraine is unwilling to make the political transitions that Russia is demanding. If the Ukrainian government continues to insist on existing in its current manifestation, then Russia will have to go to war against this government. It's also, when we speak of setting deterrence, I think in Russia at some point in time, one of the ways to deter Western engagement is that I believe Europe and NATO and the European Union, even the United States, have exploited this unique thing called a special military operation, which is war, but not war. I mean, what war do you get to ride a train from the Polish border into Kiev willy-nilly all the time? No war that I've ever been aware of. If I were doing targeting, that train line would have been taken out on day one. But there are many examples of this, the inconsistencies of targeting, or I would say that just the different approaches that the West has exploited. I think we will see Russia transition to a war, and the targeting will be different, and their approach towards Western engagement will become different too. And there are potential outcomes there that will be very serious, especially if Europe continues to indicate that it's going to continue to pour resources into Ukraine. That's something that Russia cannot allow to happen. Let's just be honest. Russia right now has the military capacity on hand in the theater to expand this conflict to the Dnieper River, maybe recapture Kherson, move into Mykolaiv, and stabilize Kharkov and Sumy, and recapture Donetsk. But Russia doesn't have the capacity right now to take Odessa. That would require additional hundreds of thousands of troops to be mobilized. Russia doesn't have the capacity to take all of Sumy, all of Chernihiv. It would require additional resources. And to get to those additional resources, Russia would have to enter into a new phase of the conflict, one which I believe would have to be manifested as a state of war. So I think we're going to have to get to that point. It doesn't mean that Russia is losing. It just means that a Russian victory now is going to have to be redefined as a total victory against Ukraine, not this special military operation.
Sorry about that, guys. Well, Colonel Wilkerson, and we can circle back to you, Scott, to finish this portion of the show off, because one of the questions I had as you were speaking, Scott, that Colonel Wilkerson and Garland pick up now, is that Scott mentioned that Russia is indeed kicking the behind of Ukraine on the battlefield. But I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure you've gotten these comments. Many people are very skeptical about this. What do you say to those right now who are doubtful about Russia's capabilities to put this conflict to an end? Because when the bomber attack happened, I think there was a lot of enthusiasm on the part, especially of the pro-Ukrainian side, that this was somehow turning the table. So, Colonel Wilkerson, I'll put it to you, then Garland, then Scott, you can close it.
Going back to what Scott just said, I go back to my Clausewitz and talk about the dynamics of warfare and how warfare changes miraculously almost. It can transform itself in midstream, as it were, and be an entirely different war, an entirely different thing that was contemplated when the first bullet went down range. And I see the prospect for that here looming greatly. And I would just take a little bit of exception with what Scott said with regard to Odessa and perhaps further gains by Russia. Should we have, and I think there is the possibility for, a sudden and complete collapse of Ukraine. I'm talking about real chaos. I'm talking about people actually turning their backs and running. We used to call it in traditional combat the exploitation. That's where you kill more of the enemy than you ever did in the months preceding that maneuver. And you kill them because you're shooting and running forward, and they're shooting, if they are at all, and running backwards. So you're shooting them in the back. Now, that's just a description of a traditional battlefield where exploitation is being executed. But I think what we're seeing here is the possibility of that. The entire Ukrainian front, as it were, collapsing in almost a moment, and Russia, in a moment of surprise, suddenly realizing it has more opportunity than it thought it had in a conventional sense. And do they exploit that? And that's the term usually used with it. Do they exploit that, or do they just stop there and say, no, we've gained what we wanted to gain, maybe a little adjustment here, adjustment there, and we'll just hold what we've got? We are pregnant with that kind of possibility, I think, now, because the Ukrainians are losing so dramatically. And if you want to do away with these arguments that are being thrown out there by everyone from Lindsey Graham to Starmer to Mertz, that Ukraine is still on the qui vive, can still fight, can still hold on and everything quickly and dramatically, that would do it. That's a dangerous moment. It's a very dangerous moment. And one reason why I think, as I said before, we need to get some really serious effort going on here to stop this before we reach that point and give both sides a real dilemma. Ukraine a dilemma from the point of view, it's over, dude. It's over, and you have lost dramatically. And Russia, wow, we have won, and we've won in a way we never dreamed we would have won. And now how do we deal with it? How do we deal with it? We do not want all of Ukraine. Please, don't want all of Ukraine. But there it is. There it is.
Garland.
You know, I tend to think, I've thought for a while similar to what Colonel Wilkerson said, and that is that what Russia's doing is they're chipping away at the capabilities of Ukraine, and that when it falls, it all falls at one time. So they wouldn't have to, you know, certainly I agree with Scott, if they had to fight their way into Odessa and into these large cities of 1 million and 2 million people and take them individually, I mean, that is, you know, cost prohibitive as far as the amount of people that you would lose and equipment it would take, et cetera. But I think that if they continue to batter away at the capabilities of Ukraine, that either a political collapse or a military collapse, either one of them will have the same effect. I mean, if there is a political collapse, then certainly you've got people fighting on the front lines, looking over their shoulders saying, where are the orders coming from? Where's more stuff coming from? What do we do? What are we fighting for? So a political or a military collapse, I think, would give you the same outcome, which would mean a city such as Odessa, et cetera, will then becomes virtually undefended because you don't have a real military there saying we're going to be resupplied, we're going to have more people. They're just sitting there saying, what are we doing? We're calling headquarters and nobody's answering the phone. And I think that's where we get to. I think at that point you have two things. You have, number one, Russia has to decide what do we want to do, how far do we want to go, and what do we want to take on our balance sheets? You know, how much of this do we want to have to feed people and fix? And that's one thing. I think the other thing is a crisis point for NATO because people are going to be screaming at Trump, you got to do something. The Russians are breaking through. But the question is going to be, and what are our options? We don't have 500,000 people to throw at the road. We don't have the resources to go in there if we wanted to go to the Russian border and probably still get bashed to hell if we did it. So there will be a crisis point, I think. And I think that's kind of what we're kind of hovering around is that crisis point, recognizing that the weight of the Russian army leaning on the Ukrainians and NATO's capabilities are going to come to a head at some point. And when they do, then where are we?
Yeah, Scott, round out this question and then we'll move on.
Round out this quick. First of all, I just to point out that anytime I enter a conversation with somebody who uses the term qui vive, I quit because it's a level of intellect and you know. That's an Army term. I mean, Marine Corps right now, quivy. It means who lives. It's a great term. I've just been chuckling ever since the Colonel used it because I thank you, sir, for injecting that kind of intellectual capacity.
General order number one.
Yeah, who lives? Who goes there? But look, I agree on the concept of collapse. here's my thing with the Russians. The Russians have not shown a tendency to engage in the kind of classic big arrow exploitation warfare. And two, we have the British who are very heavily advising the Ukrainian forces right now on how to extend this conflict. And I think what we're going to get very soon is a point where the Ukrainians are going to withdraw to the Dnieper River line. And if they can withdraw to the Dnieper River line in a modicum of order, they could create a physical barrier that would be very difficult for the Russians to exploit rapidly. And then if they can settle behind that, anchored on Odessa in the south, Kiev in the north, and maybe Dnipropetrovsk in the center, that's where Russia would need more troops if they were going to do that. The other thing is, I think the Russians are concerned about a rapid exploitation to manage the collapse is another thing that the Russians are concerned about. And this is why the Russians are putting such an emphasis on trying to achieve a modicum of political stability in Ukraine, because one of the great problems that will be presented to the Russians is, war is an extension of politics by other means. Had to do that to you, Colonel Clausewitz.
With an admixture of violence.
I love the violent part, but my academic advisors would always tell me never forget that life isn't only lived in the trenches. But this is a conflict that's being waged economically against Ukraine, and very effectively so. We just saw that Ukraine defaulted on its payments. Ukraine is literally bankrupt as we speak. It's being fought socially. We'll go back to the economy. From an industrial standpoint, in power generation standpoint, Ukraine's economic infrastructure is likewise collapsing right now. And with the collapse of the economy comes the collapse of social sustainment. You'll see societal collapse where the people collectively lose faith in the government, which brings about political collapse. And ideally, if you're trying to collapse a society, you're putting pressure on all four fronts. But if you get the total collapse, it creates a vacuum, and that creates uncertainty. And the one thing that, speaking to Russian generals and Russian politicians, not politicians so much, but diplomats, about this, the Russians want predictability. The big term that the Russians always use is we prefer predictability. It helps us as we put forward plans. And when you have collapse in a vacuum, the chaos is the most unpredictable thing out there. And so I don't think the Russians are in the chaos generation mode. I think the Russians are in the controlled collapse mode, meaning that you want to create pressures that will compel the Ukrainians to be more acceptable of outcomes that are desired by the Russians. But when you have the collapse, you create potential that is unpredictable and could be detrimental. And so I don't know if the Russians want to go into the exploitation phase, because that brings with it the potential of political collapse. And what happens if you have political collapse and you're not ready to? What happens if the political collapse creates uncertainty in Western Ukraine, and suddenly Kiev collapses and Lvov says, we're the new Western Ukrainian, a new entity. We're creating our own Western Ukrainian state. The Poles and the Ukrainians have discussed this. Zelensky has spoken with the Polish president in the past about creating a potential Western Ukrainian state that is joined up with the Poles politically and economically. So if you have a collapse in Kiev and you don't have anything to replace it to assume control over the totality of Ukraine, you now have a Western Ukrainian entity where Polish troops now come in and declare this to be similar to what Russia did with with the Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic, where suddenly these separatist entities declared independence. Russia recognized the independence and then created a collective security arrangement with them. Poland could easily do that in the Western Ukraine. They could do it unilaterally, and they would have every right to do it if you have collapse, because Poland has to look out for its own national security interests. So it needs to bring stability to its eastern frontiers. Russia doesn't want that to happen. It doesn't want the same thing to happen in other parts of Ukraine. So I think Russia is looking for more of a soft landing, as opposed to a hard crash, which means this has to be managed very carefully, which is why we come back to the special military operation. One of the reasons why this is a special military operation is there's a heavy political component to this conflict to avoid what we normally want in a war. I mean, Colonel Wilkerson, you remember in the Gulf War, when Operation Desert Storm started, I remember when I opened up the op order, they broke it out of its sealed package and boom, opened it up. Very first thing that identified the goal and objective was, of course, the liberation of Kuwait. But to achieve this, we were to destroy the Republican Guard, which was the center of gravity for the sustained survival of the Saddam government. So we were going to bring down the Saddam government. That was written right there in the op order for Operation Desert Storm. And my God, we tried to do that. We got to the point where we had the Republican Guard surrounded, and we could have killed it. Give us 36 to 48 more hours, and there would have been 30,000 more dead Iraqi guardsmen, and the Saddam government would have collapsed. But then suddenly people woke up to, well, wait a minute, if Saddam collapses, we got 1.5 million Iranians mobilized on the border. What happens if they start making a move in? What happens if Kurdistan goes, I should say going south, even though it's in the north, but if Kurdistan goes wild and the Iranians move in there, what happens if suddenly we have the Iranians make a power move into the chaos here? Are we prepared to do that? And the answer was no. Even though we had all these troops there, we had not prepared for the potential of a sustained follow-on conflict with the Iranians. And so that's why we stopped killing Republican guardsmen and started creating the conditions for the stability and survivability of the Saddam regime, the exact opposite of what we planned for at the beginning of this conflict. I think the Russians are smarter than this. The Russians understand that they have to manage this conflict to avoid total collapse, because the vacuum that's created is unpredictable. And I just come back to the Russians love predictability.
And I would just come back to the fact that Clausewitz's greatest enemy, defined as the friction of war, is
friction of war, yeah.
Once again, you just described a great example of with your alternative government scenario, a great example of what could happen. Actually, could happen. And there are other scenarios you could describe too that would involve Poland. Dastardly deeds.
Well, I think this is a good time to talk about the narrative war as well with regard to this conflict, because this is the talk that's coming out of a lot of the Western mainstream media. Putin is unleashing a summer offensive to break Ukraine. His killing machine has been told to deliver a glorious victory at any cost. And here's a direct quote from that. Maybe we can get the military folks in first on this before you, Garland. It says, quote, "The Ukrainian intelligence believe that Konstantinivka," I probably said that really wrong, and neighboring Pokrovsk will be the center of Russia's summer campaign. There are concerns about northeastern province of Sumy too, where Russia has massed 50,000 troops and is advancing towards the provincial capital in a mirror of Ukraine's own cross-border operation last year. So Scott or Colonel Wilkerson, maybe we can get into the details of what actually is happening on the front line, because I think this is a big part of what's influencing the narrative war about that we are hearing bandied about in the Western mainstream media right now.
I'll let Scott answer that substantially in the beginning, at least. But I got to say this. That's one reason I never read The Economist anymore. What a pile of crap.
Well, I mean, glorious victory. It's not just a victory. It's a
shill for the British government.
Yeah, but they had to start off with those three words. The Ukrainian intelligence believe. Gee, I wonder where they got that from.
Yeah.
MI6 wrote it for Ukrainian intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, people always made fun of me when I said I was a Marine intelligence officer. They went, "Well, that's sort of, inherently contradictory terms there." But you know, when you put Ukrainian intelligence out there, it's like I have a damn PhD. So no offense. I'm being mean now. It's very unprofessional of me. I'm trying to be professional because Colonel Wilkerson is here and he set a high bar with qui vive. So look, I mean, in a way, The Economist isn't wrong when they describe the Russian killing machine. It is a killing machine. It's been finely tuned based upon the reality of the battlefield. Russia has brought this war under control, Russian control. And just imagine how difficult that is, because Russia's fought several iterations of this conflict. Its initial engagement had a big political component to drive Ukraine to the negotiating table. That's a completely different kind of warfare. And it succeeded. They got Ukraine to the negotiating table within 6 days of initiating the special military operation. And within a month, they had successfully negotiated an agreement to terminate this conflict on terms favorable to Russia, but also favorable to Ukraine. It was if you compare and contrast the options Ukraine is facing today in Istanbul with the options they had back in 2022, man, they'd die to have those 2022 options available to them, but they missed that opportunity. But when Ukraine walked away, again, under pressure from the West, Russia transitioned to a second phase, which was basically to take control of Donetsk and Lugansk. To do this, they had to have the land bridge through Kherson and Zaporizhia, but Russia wasn't saying we're going to keep that. What Russia is saying is we're going to sustain this as part of our military campaign to achieve the liberation of Donetsk. And then afterwards, when we retrograde, when we have stable, we will pull back and this Ukrainian territory will be part of Ukraine. The proof in that is that Russia, in their negotiations with Ukraine, said we have no intention of holding on to this land. And as a good faith measure, they began to withdraw. They actively withdrew from around Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy. They were in the process of withdrawing in Kharkov. 50% of the Russian forces have been pulled back from the front lines in Kharkov as they were preparing to make a withdrawal back to the Lugansk borders. And that was exploited by Ukraine in the West with a $48 billion injection of military aid and assistance, the rebuilding of a Ukrainian military with Western training, and they carried out an offensive. But one of the reasons why the Ukrainians had great success is because the Russians weren't there. 50% of the troops were gone. They weren't prepared to fight a defense. They had to do a mobile withdrawal back to the lines that they were planning on falling back on. And then they brought in a new general, mobilized 300,000. They go into a different mode of fighting. And this mode was to transition to where the Russians can be dictating the outcome. Putin didn't want to have massive casualties. If you take a look at the Battle of Bakhmut, that wasn't the Ministry of Defense. That was a Wagner-driven operation, an anomaly in Russian military thinking, and it resulted in horrific casualties for the Russians in their victory. But that's not the Ministry of Defense's mode of fighting. They want to have a situation where they have more control over the tactical battlefield, where they are imposing their will. They're inflicting heavier casualties on the Ukrainians than they are receiving. But in order to get to that point, they had to absorb the attack of the Ukrainian army rebuilt by NATO. That was the summer 2023 counteroffensive, which Russia dealt with magnificently. But now Russia transitions over to its state where it is today. This requires getting the Ukrainians whittled down to limit their options. You can't allow Ukraine the opportunity to rebuild these massive reserves and pour them in as they want, because that creates an ebb and flow. For the Russians to win, they need to be in control consistently moving in. And so you do this by shaping the battlefield reality so that the Russian tactics, the Russian weapons, the Russian operational procedures produce a predictable outcome every time they apply it. And so the Russians have come up with about a way of fighting war. Their infantry tactics have been totally redone. I spoke to Abdialadanov, who is a Chechen lieutenant general. He's in the Russian military. So he's a Russian general, but he's of Chechen origin, a noted combat officer. Because as a Marine, I think in terms of, Fire Team Russia's, squads, operating support platoons, operating company operation, battalion, etc. The Russians have basically broken this war down in what we call 3s and 6s. And 3s is the size of your initial assault team. It goes in, it seizes a very defined piece of terrain, and then it's reinforced by the 6s, and they dig in until they stabilize, and they do it again. 3s and 6s. You don't want to go more than 3 in the assault team because of drone warfare. You present a target, the drones hit, boom. But they go into 3s because now they can support it with fire support, drone support, overlay drone support, and they can evacuate wounded if necessary. It's a very contained kind of warfare. Notice when I'm saying 3s and 6s, I'm not talking about big arrows punching through lines and maneuvering. I'm talking about very controlled, bite-sized operations taking place simultaneously across the battlefield. 3s and 6s all over the place. The Ukrainians responded to 3s and 6s by, again, this was a British concept, to throw drone swarms in. And drone swarms replaced the lack of artillery firepower. So the Ukrainians would hit them with drones. And you saw this in Pokrovsk and in other areas. When the Russians hit the drone storm, it came to an end. The Russian offense stopped cold. Now, what the Russians did is just simply divert over and outflank and eventually cause them withdraw. But what the Russians have come up with now, and you've heard this in talks with, for instance, the Azov Brigade, which is now the 3rd Assault Brigade, which is part of a larger corps of neo-Nazi Banderist loyalists. But these are very capable troops, very ferociously loyal to the regime. And they are complaining because they said, we used to be able to stop them with drones. But what the Russians have done now is that they are targeting our drone operators. They come in, and the second we start moving drones in, they hit us. They're killing. The most dangerous job in Ukraine today is a drone operator. You get killed the moment you go up. They say our drone operators have to withdraw. We lose the drone coverage. The Russians come in, and they push us back, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. Nothing. That's where we are on the battlefield right now, where Russia is dictating total control of the pace of operations. It's going to be slow, methodical. The kill ratios now in certain areas are 20 to 1. 20 Ukrainians to 1 Russian. And this is in a situation where the 3s and 6s are taking on a defensive position held by 11 to 15 Ukrainians. So you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute, in classic terminology, if I'm attacking 15 Ukrainians, I need a minimum of 45 of my guys, 3 to 1, maneuver and all that. That's not how it works, because the Russians dominate it, come in with their drones, suppress, and then they come in a carefully directed assault, and they kill all these people or capture them. And it's repeated over and over and over and over again. That's the reality of this battlefield. And this is not understood by all the idiots that are out there, singing the praise. I'm never going to denigrate the courage of the Ukrainian soldier. You know who else doesn't denigrate the courage of the Ukrainian soldier? The Russian soldier. The Russian soldiers say I mean, again, talking to Opti, who's no slouch when it comes to fighting. He's a lieutenant general. The man still, when he had some of his soldiers get wounded and the evacuation couldn't go get them, he left his command post, got in a BMP, and personally led the evacuation. Arrived there, he's laying down suppressive fire. His guy with him gets hit. He dresses that wound, evacuates that man, gets his guy out there. This is, at that time, he was a major general, doing a sergeant's job, just because that's how Russian officers are. They lead from the front. They're very brave. They often die. Hopefully Opti won't die, and he continues to do what he does. But, when you talk to Opti, and you get a feel for that the Russians are dominating this war intellectually, militarily. They design tactics based upon the reality, and their ability to adapt is amazing. As something happens on the battlefield, they take it back to the rear area, refine it. They take an officer off to the General Staff Academy who sits there, and they bring together. Colonel, you saw this at SAM, School of Advanced Military Studies, where they bring the majors, lieutenant colonels together, and they brainstorm. But the SAMs, it could take 6 months, a year and a half for something to come out of SAMs. The Russians, they go up there, Within a couple of weeks, they got it back down there, modified, sent to the front line, retrained the guys, and go. The ability of the Russian army to adapt to the realities of this is unreal, and it's something the West just doesn't. We don't understand what's happening on the battlefield right now. We don't understand it at all. We don't understand the extent to which drones are dominating this war, and we don't understand how fire support has changed, how infantry tactics have changed, how air support has changed. And I'll just leave with this. Another thing that people aren't picking up on, if I ever do write a book about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, I think I'm going to focus on the suppression of air defense, the Russian campaign to take out the integrated air defense of Ukraine, because it's been one of the most remarkable, underreported campaigns out there, because it's not a Ukrainian integrated air defense, it's a NATO integrated air defense. This is the best that NATO could do, and Russia cracked it like a rotten walnut. And I can guarantee you that if Russia could crack that, first of all, understand this, that the NATO air defense that was layered over into Ukraine is not doctrinal. Why? Because NATO never planned on having that concentration of air defense. They were never like, this much has to be put in there. They had to rewrite their doctrine to get air defense compressed like this. And the Russians beat them, whipped them, destroyed them.
Well, let me just throw something into that, because it's so pertinent. We're getting ready, Danny, to spend $2 to $3 trillion on legacy systems.
That's a scam.
that experience utterly defies and refutes.
Yeah.
You're talking about Golden Dome.
Well, I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about the manned bomber. I'm talking about two manned fighters. It's absurd.
Yeah, and Colonel Wilkerson, definitely whatever else you want to add to what Scott laid out there, one thing also about cracking these air defenses too. I mean, in one day alone, Kiev was hit with 315 drone strikes and 7 missile strikes on a random day in Kiev. And out of that, I think one civilian perhaps was killed. One, maybe. I mean, it was spread out across a few places. There were about 3 spread out across a few places. So wherever you want to react to what Scott said, as well as this development, because I think it does show not only just how much Russia has cracked these air defenses, but how precisely they've cracked them.
The only thing I would add to it, I can't add much to what Scott said, but I would add, in addition to how stupid we are in terms of the money we're going to spend, and even in Hegseth's new initiative to go out to Anduril and Palantir and others, it's the same stupidity, because they're looking at the same kind of legacy systems just with new technology, which is nuts. But the other thing I would say too is that what this probably means ultimately, as we were saying before at the ether level, is that we need to get this thing stopped, and we need to get it stopped through the President of the United States, no matter how incompetent he might be to that stoppage. We don't need any more of this. We're gonna let it get out of hand, and it reminds me too much of what we're doing in the Levant, in Gaza. What happened this morning with the conversation that supposedly happened between Trump and Netanyahu, where Netanyahu guaranteed him that he was willing to accept 3.67% enrichment by the Iranians, and that he wouldn't attack. This is all nonsense in my view. That's all propaganda from Netanyahu. I don't even know if it's a legitimate description of the phone call. But we're really waltzing around some very dangerous situations in the world right now. And we need to get at least one of them shut down, if not all of them shut down simultaneously. Otherwise, we're in trouble. And at the same time, as I was trying to indicate with the money we're going to spend on these idiotic schemes, which just reward the military industrial contractors, we are bankrupt. And we just won't admit it to ourselves.
Garland, please come in here.
Well, one of the things I'll say about the air defense issue, and that is, I personally, I had my suspicions about the state of air defense, NATO state of air defense, and worldwide about the direction it was going. I recall some years ago at Fox, I was talking to some guy that was there to talk about, missile defense, and he was the head of like the U.S. Physicist Society or something, and he made it very simple. He just said, Garland, it's very, very simple. We just throw up so many missiles that you can't shoot them down. We just put a bunch of dummies. We fire. I don't care what you got for some Golden Dome back then. It was missile defense. If I fire 1,000 missiles, 2,000, 3,000, 80% of them are dummies. You're not going to be able to stop it. That's the bottom line. Well, what we saw where I think the world learned a lot was the Iranian missile attack wasn't really an attack, a demonstration, shall we say, on Israel, where they just threw so many missiles and dummies and drones and all that stuff up that they overwhelmed an air defense. And that's where we are. And I think the U.S. isn't acknowledging that reality. As we say, you better do this, Iran, or else. Well, the reality is there is no or else, because if we say we're going to attack Iran, we have no guarantee that their air defense system, which is fairly elaborate, and it seems to have been beefed up by the Russians, may very well be able to repel an attack that we undertake against them anyway. Secondly, if they want to hit us, all they got to do is overwhelm all of our systems all throughout the region, and they can easily be defeated. So we're still pretending that we have this air superiority, pretending that we can attack Iran, pretending that we can stand up in the Pacific region, that we can actually fight China on their borders when we can't, when we've just been shamed by Yemen. So our government is living in this false military paradigm where we still have the capability to launch attacks against even, I wouldn't call them peer opponents, but fairly strong opponents, even weak opponents. We can't attack anybody. We don't need to get in a fight with anyone. And the only thing we're going to do is, if we start punching against someone out here who has drones and missiles, is get ourselves humiliated once and for all. And hopefully it doesn't go really, really bad, because of course, our leaders are probably to some extent nuclear prone. And as soon as we punch somebody and they smack the daylights out of us, they're going to start screaming, let's send nukes. And that then, regardless of what happens, that ends the U.S. empire. That ends the U.S. as the project that it once was. So it's a very dangerous situation, but there is a reality that our leaders will not accept when it comes to how air defense has changed the military paradigm worldwide.
Yeah, indeed. And well, Scott, Colonel Wilkerson, please.
I was just going to say that's my greatest fear, is that we're going to get into something conventional. We're going to lose so badly. Think 3 carriers on the bottom of the ocean that we're going to go nuclear.
Well, Scott, I think this is a good time then to talk about this U.S.-Russia Citizen Summit that you are helping organize. I can pull it up. The link is in the video description if you want to talk about this, because I know a big part of your efforts to build a U.S.-Russia understanding is to prevent this exact scenario.
Yeah. First of all, I have to say this is, as Colonel Wilkerson knows, you don't win struggles through battles. You have to have a campaign. The campaign has to be linked to strategic objectives. And we've outlined some pretty difficult problems here. To me, one of the greatest problems that we face when it comes to U.S.-Russian relations is the expiration of New START Treaty in February. The lunacy of Golden Dome and the instability that those two things will bring together. But how do you get to that as a citizen? Because otherwise we just allow ourselves to be taken hostage by policymakers who don't give a damn what we think, and oftentimes formulate policy in a vacuum of politically driven stupidity, such as Golden Dome. I mean, it won't work, it can't work, but we're going to spend billions proving that point. But how do you get the citizens engaged? Because it's important that the citizens engage. I do believe when we speak of American democracy in the bottom-up approach, meaning that we, the people, have a voice and we can make this voice resonate, and that voice can achieve change if it's focused properly. Right now in the United States, the average American is infected, and they didn't mean to be, but they have been infected just because of the way our society is structured with Russophobia. I mean, just think about it for a second. All the Hollywood movies that you watch, how are the Russians presented? As intelligent, wonderful people, cultured, or, some guy with a fur hat and, beer. I am a Russian. I drink vodka. I wrestle bears. I am very, very bad man. And, we view them as dangerous. And the Russian women, of course, have wonderful accents, very beautiful, but they're trying to, to put a knife in our back. This is how we've been conditioned, so that we fear Russia. We have an inherent fear for Russia. And from that fear, our government exploits us, and they put out policies that address this fear. That fear is derived from ignorance. I have found that one of the best tools for overcoming ignorance is direct dialogue. If I have a problem with my neighbor, rather than me sitting here going on social media and posting that problem and him responding or her responding, hypothetically, I don't do this, but I'm just saying, the best way to overcome that problem is to go have a conversation face to face. Hey, this is me. This is you. How you doing? Let's have a beer. Let's have a Diet Coke. Let's talk this thing out. We learn about each other, and misconceptions, misperceptions we had disappears. We realize we have a lot more in common than we have not in common. I think that's what we need to do with the Russian people. In 1985, Phil Donahue, the great Phil Donahue, great and late Phil Donahue, together with a man named Vladimir Posner, put together something they called the Space Bridge. They called it Space Bridge because the connectivity was through satellite telephones, a new technology back then. And it was a citizen summit, a Russian-U.S. citizen summit. And it allowed American citizens sitting in Seattle, Washington, to communicate with Russian civilians sitting in St. Petersburg. And they asked each other questions. They had a dialogue, and they began to realize that they're the same people. They're human beings, that they care about the same things. They laugh at the same jokes. They cry at the same, emotional triggers. They care. They want to live. And this initial space bridge then triggered others that helped create the environment that led to the lowering of the Iron Curtain and the normalizing of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, and then later Russia. Now, our politicians fumbled this opportunity, and today we're faced with a new Cold War looming. And do we trust the dialogue that's taking place between our government and the Russians? And I say no. The American people, our job isn't to trust the government at all. Our job is to hold the government accountable for what it does in our name. I think we need to set an example. And through the setting of this example, we need to also educate the American people not to be afraid of the Russians. And how do you do that? By exposing them to the reality of Russia. And so we're going to do, on the 40th anniversary of the original Space Bridge, we're going to do Space Bridge, a new U.S.-Russian Citizens Summit. We're going to link 50 Americans with 50 Russians, and we're going to have a dialogue over the course of 3 hours. And it's going to be streamed live, and it's going to be recorded and available. And we hope to use that as a teaching mechanism for other Americans to say, hey, we want to engage with these Russians. They maybe repeat this exercise over and over again. And in the process, inoculate ourselves against Russophobia so that we're not afraid of the Russians. So when the government comes down and says, you must approve $175 billion to defend against the Russian threat, we go, well, wait a minute. Is there really a Russian threat? What if we just talk to them? It's cheaper and it produces better outcomes. And so that's what we're trying to do here. Some people might call me naive, and you know what? It may be naive. But I also view it as the beginning of a process, a campaign that will, because if I can get the American people to accept the premise that we can live in peace with the Russians, then I could get them to accept the premise that we don't need Star Wars. We don't need Golden Dome. We don't need new missiles, that we need to engage in arms control related dialogue. When was the last time you heard anybody talk about arms control in the Trump administration anywhere? It's just not part of the national lexicon. It used to be everything. Back when I was a young buck, that's what I cut my teeth on. I didn't mean to. I joined the Marine Corps to close with and destroy, but next thing I know, they got me in the middle of the Soviet Union, engaged in arms control verification. And I fell in love with it because it was good. It brought about a nice result. It's made the world a safer place. And I became a believer in these arms control treaty vehicles. We're about to watch the last remaining one expire, and there's nothing to replace it. The treaty that I implemented that I believe saved the world from destruction, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, is no more. And the weapon systems that we once got rid of are now threatening to come back and bring the world close to, the kind of danger that prompted us to get rid of them to begin with. But the campaign can only be waged if you have a solid foundation upon which to build the campaign. And I believe that we need a foundation of support from the American people that's predicated on a willingness to engage with the Russians responsibly, people to people. And that's what this Citizens Summit is all about. It'll be on June 18th in Kingston, New York. It's a ticketed event because we don't have the budgets. We tried to go to New York City and look at getting a theater that could hold a couple hundred people. And I think the low end budget was $120,000. And I went, yeah, that's like orders of magnitude above my budget right now. So we downsized, but it doesn't mean it's a lack of quality. The event is held at Gerald Celante's wonderful Mohican Market. We've converted it into what we call the American Cafe. So when the Russians look in, they're going to see a slice of Americana. This isn't going to be Hollywood. Thank God. I think LA's under fire right now. It's not going to be New York City. Too expensive. It's going to be America, and we're going to be staffing it with Americans, the average working class Americans from all walks of life. And that's what the Russians are going to see, the good, the bad, whatever. It's going to be the real America. And I hope we get to see the real Russia, and we get to, drop all pretense. This is who we are. This is what we're about. And have a meaningful dialogue. It's a wonderful opportunity. And thankfully Garland, you've spoken about this in the past, and Danny, we've talked about this, and Larry, we've done the same thing. I apologize, sir, Colonel Wilkerson. Who am I to call Colonel Wilkerson? No, I know. I let my guard down. my former mentors looking up at him, going, God, I can't say what he's going to say, but Ritter, don't you ever get familiar with a colonel again. But it's just in my training. But the point is, we're talking about the importance of alternative media. This isn't going to be covered by mainstream media. They would never touch this. In fact, the Russians initially tried. I mean, it's amazing. They reached out to all the mainstream media, and they either got a stead, no way are we going to do this, or just no response. So they were concerned about this alternative media approach. But what I tried to tell them is that we have this family of podcast idea. I mean, last year we could do events that would end up getting 3 to 5 million views, and the potential for even more. That's outperforming much of the mainstream media alternatives out there. So even though this is a smaller venue, I think we're going to crack into the American audience. I think we're going to get a good audience. I think we have the chance of succeeding. And so I'm excited about this opportunity. And I have some friends that I communicate with who are very interested in this conflict, who are depressed right now, because how could you not be depressed after listening to some of the stuff that we were throwing out there earlier? This is a very dangerous situation. And there's so many people that listen to this harsh reality we put out there that just get overwhelmed with depression and say, it's just hopeless. It's hopeless. And so the Citizens Summit also injects, I think, a positive vibe to bring some hope that there is a potential pathway out of there. And I like to wake up in the morning and not just say I'm here to confront problems, but I'm here to solve problems. And I think the Citizens Summit is one part of a solution to the complex problems we face today. But thanks for allowing me to talk about it, Danny. I really appreciate it.
There you go, Danny.
Of course, I was muted. Everyone can find the link to the U.S. Citizen Summit in the video description below after the show. And you can also find Scott is now on YouTube again, so you can find his YouTube channel too.
Today was the first post. We'll see how long YouTube allows me to stay up. But I'll just can I make one last pitch?
Okay, sure.
As I said, the New York City video is $120,000. We couldn't afford it. We initiated something based upon the budget that we had. I can already tell you that the actual expenses are going to be 2 or 3 times greater than the initial thing. Now, I'm not talking 6 digits, but I am talking, a couple $1,000s that we need to raise. We're not charging any money for people to come to this thing, but there's a donation button in this thing, and if people can see fit to donate, it would be greatly appreciated. It doesn't go into my pocket. What I can guarantee is that if I don't get the donations, it comes out of my pocket because I have personally committed to making this succeed. And if you want Scott Ritter to be married to Mrs. Ritter for a significant period of time, help me save my marriage, because I have committed myself to something that financially, anyways, if you believe in peace, you want to make this work, and you want to save my marriage, donate.
There you go. There you go. That's the pitch. Well, everyone, you can find that link again in the video description below. Gentlemen, I have one more story I want to cover on West Asia, what's been going on there. I know, Scott, you have another appointment in about 20 minutes. How about we do this story, and then, Scott, if you have to run out, you can run out. Does that sound good? All right. Let's do it. Let's do it. Well, I wanted to begin this story then. We can begin with you, Colonel Wilkerson, because of course there's been this report about Iran obtaining what they are saying are a trove of strategic and sensitive Israeli intelligence on perhaps the nuclear facility, their own nuclear facilities, maybe their own nuclear weapons depots. We don't know exactly, but they're saying it is very valuable information. And then you have Donald Trump. It seems like he's changing all the time his position on the nuclear negotiations in terms of his public presentation. Some days he's saying, well, we're going to allow enrichment. Now he's saying no enrichment at all for Iran, and that they're rejecting Iran's propositions. And then we have, of course, what happened with the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. Colonel Wilkerson, what's your reaction to all of this? Where are we in not only the U.S.-Iran situation, but a lot of this revolves around Israel. So talk about your reaction to these developments.
Let me take the last one you mentioned first. I was reading something, I think, I don't remember where it was, but it was Special Rapporteur Albanese, who's been very outspoken on this, unlike many UN people, consistently. And she essentially said, where was the Greek Navy? Where was the Turkish Navy? Where was the Italian Navy? Where was any Navy in the Mediterranean that's worth a damn? This is a violation of international law. Now, we know that previous ones were too. Conscience was hit by a drone and big hole blown in her. She had to go into Port Malta. And many attempts beforehand have either been stymied or met with Israeli force. This one they did on the high seas, not in their territorial waters, not by any stretch of imagination. And they did it in a more, shall we say, open way, because I think they realized, particularly with Greta Thunberg on board and others, that it would have been a dramatic, and this in the past does not seem to have dissuaded them, public relations fiasco if they did something and harmed someone. But I take Albanese for what she's saying. No one is prosecuting any action against the Israelis for violating international law on the high seas. And we do freedom of navigation exercises all the time in the South China Sea and elsewhere. And our ostensible purpose is to protect the high seas and to protect the regime that has grown up over the years in terms of the law of those seas. No one's doing anything here. I don't expect the United States to do anything, bastards that we are, but someone should be taking Israel on in a very forceful, dynamic way as they do these things that are so public and so seen by the world everywhere that are wrong. That's my first comment. My second comment is I don't think this administration knows what's up and what's down with regard to these negotiations with Iran. And I say that and then qualify it with the remark that I made earlier that this morning I heard there was a phone call between Netanyahu and Trump. Whether it's apocryphal or not, I don't know. I hope it's not. And Netanyahu, in whatever sincerity Netanyahu can muster, told Trump that he was willing to accept 3.67 or 3.76, whatever it is, the lowest percentage of enrichment, and not go to war. And he would make a promise to that effect to Trump. If that occurred, then that takes, I think, the red line that both the Ayatollah and the foreign minister, Arshi, has said are indeed red lines, out of the negotiation impossibility, and opens up some vistas for making progress on this agreement that I think fundamentally Donald Trump would rather see. He'd rather have an agreement. Won't be much different from the JCPOA, but who cares? I mean, he screwed that one up himself. We'll have an agreement and we can proceed on those lines. And then what we do really, as Scott knows well, we are just working out the details of a verification regime, so to speak, and how the IAEA is going to do it. Now, the complication, the IAEA just announced that Iran has, and I didn't see the specifics, I'm waiting for them, but Iran has been caught cheating, or not cheating necessarily, but going beyond what the parameters were with the IAEA for what it could do in its nuclear program. So we got to see that too. But in any event, if we have got an opening now where we can go back to some reasonable negotiations and Witkoff cannot have handcuffs on himself, then I'm guardedly optimistic about working that one out. At the same time, I think Israel is in such straits right now. It's doing things like bringing in what I would call mercenary terrorists, if you will, to fight Hamas on the ground in Gaza. It's got this humanitarian organization going that for all intents and purposes looks to me like a U.S., British-funded, Israeli-funded organization to gather Palestinians so they can be more efficiently killed, despite its remonstrances to the contrary. I think that is what it was designed for, to get more Palestinians killed faster, to make the death march more efficient. And I think Israel's in trouble. I really think it's in trouble. I've been saying that for some time, but I've been, I think, accurate in my assessment. I haven't even mentioned some of the other problems that they have, but now they've even got the Lebanese government, tool of the United States that it is, saying things about their presence in Lebanon. They are expanding their presence in Syria. At the same time that the new leader of Syria is walking through the park in central Damascus with his wife and looking anything but like an Islamic chieftain, and extolling the virtues of democracy and the new relationship he has with the United States and such. And God knows what that's going to mean eventually, because we just inked an agreement to keep our troops there in perpetuity, as far as I can see. They're all around the zinc field, of course. And they're there ostensibly to fight ISIS, and intelligence sources telling me that there hasn't been an ISIS fighter around there in a long time, except in prison. So I don't know where this is going, but I don't think Israel is in good straits right now. I think it's in dire straits. And so where do we go with this? Do we make an agreement, and do we have an agreement that Netanyahu reluctantly accepts? Does his government fall? Looking a lot like that might happen too. And what replaces him if it does? This is a very difficult situation to assess right now, and I'm not confident, and this is my biggest problem, I'm not confident with this team. Their diplomatic prowess is limited to Witkoff. They have no national security decision-making process that I can detect. Things are happening underneath the president's responsibility, if you will, in the intelligence community. I would have already fired Gabbard if I were Donald Trump. I would have fired Ratcliffe too. I think a lot of these things that have happened that are causing him enormous problems are happening because the so-called deep state, and it is a deep state, and it is there, and it's mostly neoconservatives spread all over the government, is doing things with his own intelligence community. Lindsey Graham is right there in the middle of it too, as are probably some other members of Congress, that are not what he wants done. And his lack of attention, and lack of attention to detail in particular, is causing a wide avenue to open up for these things to happen. That's a long answer to I'm not as optimistic as I was hoping I would be after hearing this information this morning.
Darlin.
Well, I would like to hope that some kind of a deal initially happens, but the contradictions here are so extreme that it's hard for me to believe that these things will be ironed out. There are three particular ones. Number one, we are supposedly negotiating with Iran so that they don't get a nuclear weapon, but the U.S. intelligence assessment has repeatedly said that Iran is not trying to weaponize their nuclear program. So the United States kind of official position is the government, the executive branch, is negotiating to stop Iran from getting something that their own intelligence experts have said that Iran's not trying to get. So Iran simply says, you know what? Fair enough. That's a contradiction you have to deal with, but we're willing to make you a deal. How easy is it for us to make this deal? We don't want to do it anyway. I mean, we don't want these nuclear weapons anyway. But that's a strange contradiction that people don't even ask President Trump. Somewhere, somehow, at one of these press conferences, someone should bring that up, and nobody in the mainstream media will ever do that. The next thing is this: that Iran is acting within the scope of international law, even when it comes to their nuclear program. Israel clearly is not. So here's another contradiction. We're saying to Iran, you can't do things that international law allows you to do, while we all know that Israel is denying. Israel, one day they'll say, well, I think we should nuke Iran. I think we should nuke God, that we should nuke everybody, but we won't admit that we have nuclear weapons. That's a weird contradiction that you have to consider how that affects the overall narrative. And last but not least, I would say this, that if I'm Iran, based on the history of the U.S. keeping its word, be it the Minsk Accords, the JCPOA, even in the JCPOA, from the very beginning, the U.S. said, if you do this, we'll drop certain sanctions, and never did it. We never kept our word. If I'm Iran, I say, okay, we're going to write this deal, this contract, and every contract has something which executes the contract. And if I'm Iran, I'd say, we got the deal. Okay, the deal's all great. Okay, this contract that we have now is executed when you drop the sanctions. You said last time you said you were going to drop the sanctions, and you didn't, and you asked us to go along with it, even though you didn't keep up your end of the bargain. Iran has to say, whatever we write up is officially executed when you hold up your end of the bargain. That executes it. Because the truth is, the U.S. will promise to drop the sanctions, but they ain't dropping the sanctions. So if Iran makes that argument, if they get that in there, there's no deal anyway, because the U.S. is not going to keep their word. So this thing is so full of contradictions. I would like to believe that we could get a deal, but how do you mitigate contradictions of that magnitude?
Scott, definitely wherever you want to react to all of this. I also, given that you are former intelligence, Marine intelligence, I would also like you to talk about, if you could, what exactly could Iran have now, and what would be the significance, but wherever you want to take it, before and after.
Look, we've got to be very honest about where we're at here. Yes, Iran says they don't have a nuclear weapons program. Iran has a nuclear weapons program. That's just the straight up truth. It's not your classic nuclear weapons program, meaning that it's been organized to, be this way. But there is no other reason for Iran to have 60% enriched uranium other than to be one step away from nuclear weapons potential. And the Iranians have admitted this. They said that they produce 60% enriched uranium to be a threshold state. Threshold to what? Threshold to what? So that's a threat. That's an implied threat. Now, we can sit here and talk about the inherent contradictions of Israel and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. Iran's not allowed to have nuclear weapons. That's the law. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. There is no clause in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that says, oh, just because Israel gets to do it, you get to violate that. The Iranian government has put the IAEA Director General on notice that if Israel strikes Iran, Iran will withdraw from the NPT and will build nuclear weapons. Now, how do you build nuclear weapons in short order if you don't have a nuclear weapons already envisioned, in mind, ready to execute? You see, if you can enrich to 60% enriched uranium, you can enrich to 98%. This is one step. And the Iranians have advanced enriched enrichment cascades they've already put together. They've assembled. They're underground in Firdos, can't be struck by conventional weapons. Iran has all of the tools. All these missiles that we saw get fired against Israel, the new hypersonic missiles, etc. People haven't really thought too much about that technology that goes into it. Because one of the things that people say is, well, and we used to say this about the Iraqis. There's a big difference, because they said Iraq's going to have a breakout nuclear weapons program. And 6 months after stealing all the enriched uranium from their reactor and processing it and enriching it, they could produce a device. That device weighed like 2,000 pounds. Couldn't be delivered by anything. And you had to, bring it out in the truck and do the experiment to create a weapon. And we said this about the North Koreans too. Do the North Koreans truly have a nuclear capable ICBM? Because to fire an ICBM, it has to get high up, comes in, reentry, heat, what burns up electronics. And, do the North Koreans have what it takes to survive reentry? Do they have electronics capable of surviving in, in the complex world of ballistic missile launch? Well, Iran proved that. See, Iran fired extraordinarily sophisticated warheads at Israel. These are maneuverable warheads, hypersonic warheads that absorb heat, advanced composite materials in the warheads, electronic packages, sophisticated electronic packages that are designed to survive the heat of reentry. So every single obstacle that exists to employ a nuclear warhead on a missile has been overcome by the Iranians technologically. They already have it. And the weapons design doesn't have to be the most sophisticated implosion device. If you want to deliver a weapon of 15 to 20 kilotons, a simple uranium gun device is all that's needed. And so Iran is literally weeks away from having a deliverable nuclear weapon. That's what a threshold state is, and Iran has positioned itself to be a nuclear threshold state. Does it have a right to? I guess all the component pieces fall into Article 4 of the nuclear nonproliferation. But let's not pretend that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. Even Tulsi Gabbard's ridiculously worded statement, it just talks about the political decision to make a nuclear weapon and that it doesn't have a declared nuclear weapons capability. But everything I said is absolutely 100% true, verifiable, confirmed by multiple Iranian statements themselves. So that's where we're at today. This isn't a game. Okay. And I will also say this. The United States and Israel will never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So for all the people out there who fantasize about, let's level the playing field, let's get an Iranian nuclear bomb so it level. Do you know that the head of Central Command today is briefing the President of the United States on all military options to attack Iran's nuclear program right now? When I say all military, remember that cascade I talked about that can take it to the next step to 98%? That's in Firdos, the underground nuclear reactor. That can't be hit by anything we have conventionally. And if we don't take it out in the first strike, Iran has a nuclear weapon. So what does that tell you? I'm a military planner. I've done this. It tells me that I apply the weapon to the problem. I've identified a problem. I've identified a level of destruction that's necessary, and I need a weapon capable of doing that. We have those weapons. They're nuclear weapons. And I'm telling you right now, there's a nuclear strike plan being planned against Iran as we speak. I've been warning about this from day one. I've been trying to tell the Iranians, don't become a threshold state because you're playing a game you can't win. You're playing a game you can't win. I'm not saying we're going to win. I don't say anybody wins. But Iran doesn't emerge from this intact.
America playing a game.
This will not just be a strike to take out Iran's nuclear capability. It will be a strike to take out Iran itself. It's being planned right now. Central Command just informed the President of the United States that those plans are being presented to the White House as we speak. Now, is this bluff?
Not backing down. Nobody
it could be
down. They could play crazy.
It could be.
They won't.
But this is how dangerous the situation is, where we have boxed ourselves into a rhetorical corner with this zero enrichment nonsense. This could have been solved 2 weeks ago. I mean, Witkoff had a deal. The Iranians have been over backwards to make this deal possible.
Yeah.
They have bent over
They bent over
backwards.
backwards.
They have agreed to allow U.S.
They
inspectors
say hell no.
on the ground as
The
part
hell
of the
with them. Let's
IAEA
go to
teams.
war. Nuke 'em.
I'm here to tell you, as a former U.S. inspector who operated on the ground in Iraq, with a U.S. inspector comes the U.S. intelligence community, which means that, in effect, Iran has said, we're going to allow American spies to come on the ground and do the spying. Because why? They want to solve this problem. Iran has agreed to limit their enrichment to 3.75%. Iran has agreed to allow excess enrichment capacity to be classified as a fuel bank operating under American, UAE, Saudi joint partnership, Russian joint partnership. Iran has done everything necessary to make this deal possible. And Donald Trump, in his mouth, in his ego, in his ignorance, is putting us on the cusp today where the Central Command General is briefing him on nuclear strike options against Iran.
They don't care.
That's where we're at.
They don't care.
That's the seriousness. And I don't think the moron in I apologize. I was going to go down that path.
Out in the middle.
Be responsible, Scott. Be responsible. This man is going to kill us all. This man is going to get us involved in things, because I will tell you this right now. If we nuke Iran, which would be what we do, we don't take out their missile capability. And Iran will now kill 10,000 American service members who are in bases surrounded. They will take out the state of Israel. That creates instability in its own right. Remember how we talked earlier about Ukraine? You don't want to create a vacuum of chaos because you can't predict outcomes. It's the same problem we had when we took out Saddam Hussein. We were smart in 1991. Don't get rid of Saddam because we don't know what comes after. Keep the devil that you know so you can control predictability. But then we yanked him out. Chaos ensued. Next thing you know, the entire Middle East is aflame. This is an extraordinarily dangerous situation right now. And how many Americans are talking about it? And in order to engage Americans, the second I talk about this, they all say, you're fear-mongering. Garland, you know, a month ago, Danny, you know, a month ago, I was telling you this was going to happen. And I'm not saying you, Danny, but your audience was like, fear mongering. No,
you saying
that.
Iran,
Screw you people.
U.S. ass and bend over.
We're on the cusp of a nuclear war right now.
Fuck no.
The commanding general of CENTCOM is briefing the president of the United States as we speak on nuclear strike options against Iran. It's not Scott Ritter warmongering, guys. It's reality. It's here.
Well, Israel, it's the end of
now.
People love it.
What are we going to do about it?
Iran is the end of Israel.
What are we going to do about it? We've left ourselves in this fantasy world where Israel's got nuclear weapons, therefore Iran should be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Well, that's going to get everybody killed. Iran is not allowed to have nuclear weapons. They're not going to have nuclear weapons. And if they position themselves to be a threshold state on the cusp of having them, they will be eliminated. And we have a general building the plans to do that right now as we speak. What are we going to do to stop this? How do we stop this? Well, the good news is, I think Israel woke up to the fact, because Iran has that intelligence. This is why you got the phone call from Netanyahu this morning, because Netanyahu woke up and went, what's happening? America's going to do what? Because we were just bullshitting about attacking Israel. We were never going to attack Israel. That was his posturing. That's right. You guys are getting ready to attack Israel? That means we die. That means I die. They got the location of my home and all my secret hiding places, and their missiles were coming. We don't want to die. Mr. President, we'll take 3.75% enriched uranium. Now, what is Donald Trump going to do with that? Donald Trump's prior position was zero, because that's what Netanyahu was telling them. None, zero, can't have it. If Netanyahu truly committed 3.75% enriched uranium, can this president back off? Can he accept that? This is where we're at. I mean, this is we keep talking about Ukraine, and it is a dangerous situation. Don't get me wrong. This situation with Iran is one of the most dangerous situations we face today, because American nuclear weapons could be used at any moment. At any moment.
Yeah.
And as Witkoff said, the moment one nuclear weapon's used, the entire global market collapses overnight. Whatever you think you have in terms of retirement funds, whatever you think's going on, all that stuff, it's gone. The whole world. That's where we're at right now. I don't mean to get too spun up, Danny, but I've been warning about this for a long time. And I feel like I'm speaking till I'm blue in the face, and I feel like the digital mob never got it. You know, who the hell's that guy? You know, Danny Thang or whatever the hell his name is. You know, you just sit there and pontificate stupidity. Well, all your stupid pontification out there, guys, how are you going to stop this, the commanding general of Central Command from briefing the President of the United States on nuclear strike plans? That's happening right now. You aren't. You aren't. That's it. I don't mean to be too depressing, but there's where I'm at.
Well,
I got to run.
Colonel,
Unfortunately,
yeah,
I've got
of
a guy on. So I'm going to sit there and throw that hornet's nest out there.
Before Scott leaves, let me just dampen it a little bit. I have been in the room with a 4-star Navy admiral when we had developed plans for nuclear strikes that were going to be briefed to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the President of the United States. That's not, I won't say it's common, but this won't be the first time if it's happening at Central Command. The president wants all options. And that sometimes, and in my experience, twice, it was an option I actually saw. I actually did some of the war planning on. So that's not necessarily an indication that we're going to do it. But I agree with Scott that it is an indication that it's there and being thought about, and that's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. Japan is a threshold nuclear state, far more sophisticated than Iran, but Japan is our ally, and so we don't say anything about that. Japan could be a full-up nuclear power in 6 to 8 months with everything that we have, probably. The difference is that we see Iran as an enemy. For what reason, I have a hard time figuring out from time to time, but we see them as an enemy. If we were to do what Scott is saying there's the potential we do, and I agree that there might be the potential for it, it'd be a disaster. We would have opened the genie. We would have put it on the table, and we'd have been the first ones to do it, which I've been saying all along. Who did it in 1945? Who invented the technology, stealing the world's scientists and putting its own scientists in there with them? And who did it in 1945? Not once, but twice against human beings. We will do it again. So, you know, leaven it a little bit, and then it's a serious.
I just want to add before I go, just to make things happier. I spoke with a senior Russian in the know, and he said that he said Russia won't be the first to use tactical nuclear weapons. Russia's not going to break the Hiroshima and Nagasaki psychological barrier. But if the United States uses tactical nuclear weapons, Russia won't. It will become commonplace, and that's the big danger. We're not talking about global ending this, but we are talking about now that nuclear weapons now have become a tool to solve smaller problems. And he said Russia will definitely use nuclear weapons if that's the case. So America breaking this psychological barriers is a huge deal that people have to think about. Okay, Danny Garland, Colonel, I thank you very much.
One last word that actually came up in the discussions with Admiral Crow at SINCPAC.
That very thing?
That very thing was said. And you know, nothing ever came of that. Vesey was of the same mind. So,
well, thank God we had General Crow, or Admiral Crow.
Admiral Crow.
Yeah. We got Pete Hedges now. How common?
Yeah, I know. It's scary. There's no adult leadership. Period.
None. All right, I got to go, guys. Thanks.
All right. Take care. Thank you, Scott.
You know, Danny, can I make a quick comment on that?
Yes, sure.
The comment is this, and again, this is all speculation. Surely. I don't think, this is going to be my position, I don't think Donald Trump's going to get the order to attack Iran for a number of reasons. I could go on and on. One of the things, just one of them, is political. We've already seen the reality. So we know that, you know, he's got so much pressure coming from the Senate and of the neocons and all these other Zionists and everybody, attack Iran. But I also do believe that there are some people in the military who are saying to him, yeah, you know, you saw what happened with Yemen, and it ain't gonna be pretty with Iran. And of course, you know, you throw a nuke and that's it for the US. That's it for us. You know what I mean? You're talking about complete economic collapse and you're the one who ended the United States project, right? That's it. You ended it. It's over. I do believe this, that Donald Trump's neocon adversaries would love to see Donald Trump attack Iran conventionally for two reasons. Number one, because they want Iran attacked. But number two, because they hate Donald Trump and they understand something politically. Don't get me wrong, I don't agree with the MAGA. I have ideological differences from MAGA. But right now, to be quite frank, MAGA is the only true coherent political movement of note in the United States. There are others that may be burgeoning, but an actual credible political movement that can express itself at the voting booth, can put people in office, can take people out of office. MAGA is this, and it is inextricably tied to the person of Donald Trump. The MAGA people, you've seen Marjorie Taylor Greene and more say, we do not want a war with Iran. We didn't vote for a war with Iran. We understand what the MAGA people want. MAGA was the Tea Party. Then they started off with, economic issues about the bailouts. They were pissed at, and it kind of pissed off at that. It kind of morphed into MAGA. So MAGA was, at its heart, an economic movement after 2008. And I think it still is at its heart. The whole America First thing is, what about us? Why is all this? You're doing all of these things. What about us? That's the America First MAGA movement. And they're screaming at the top of their lungs, Michael Flynn, on and on. Donald Trump, we didn't vote for this. I think the neocons that hate Donald Trump know one thing for sure they will get, and that is they will end the ties between MAGA and Donald Trump if he starts, because you get two things. If he starts a war, if he attacks conventionally, if he attacks Iran, you get, doggone it, we didn't vote for this. Number two, let's go the easy way of it, okay? Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz. There's not all of these deaths and everything, but Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz. Well, how's it going to work out when we're paying $13, $15 a gallon for oil? We're still going to get economic collapse and probably hyperinflation as a result of that. So the bottom line is that would be the quickest way they could end MAGA. They don't really give a crap about our economy or any of that other stuff. I've got a book right here called Ally versus Ally, where Tony Blinken has pretty much said in there, we don't really care about the business thing. This is all geopolitical to us. So I think the bonus for the neocons is they would get to destroy MAGA. They would get to take MAGA away from Trump. They would get to isolate Trump, and then politically they'd tear him to shreds.
Colonel Wilkerson, I just in the last
Garland, good assessment.
Yeah. In the last 5-10 minutes, actually, I'll just outline my position and get your reactions to it. And
stop me if you think you've heard this one before. President Trump was reportedly stern, with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in a call on Tuesday. He reportedly told him to permanently end the war in the Gaza Strip and that attacking Iran was off limits. But we've been through this before. I feel like this is Pavlovian, right? Every couple of weeks, we're like, oh, we're letting them do it. Oh, we're talking tough. Oh, no, we're going to let him. No, we're talking tough. President Trump, he sends the arms anyway, tough talk or not, and then says he's a great friend of Israel, but then says the suffering of the people in Gaza has to stop, not acknowledging the cause of said suffering. And then Israel goes forward and does things like this, reportedly that they're close to attacking Iran, according to Israeli Channel 14. The U.S. tankers are passing the Persian Gulf, had been put on high alert. The U.S. ordering the evacuation of family members and non-essential personnel in certain embassies there and preparing the embassy in Iraq. We all know only Donald Trump can put a stop to Israel's attacks of Iran and the people in Palestine, in Gaza, but he hasn't had the appetite to do it. It won't stop until he actually stops the weapons, not just saying please to Netanyahu or getting nasty on the phone. Now he's also saying, he also said to Bret Baier that Iran is becoming much more aggressive in nuclear talks. That's what he told Fox News. And they're behaving differently. That's a quote. He says they're behaving much differently. The quote is, Iran is acting much differently in negotiations than it did just days ago. Who, again, is acting differently? Because when we began those talks, the U.S. explicitly said that it was okay with Iran having a civil nuclear program, enriching uranium up to 3%. Just days later, when it became clear that Israel was not game for that, that their line in the sand was 0%, the U.S. said, sorry, 0%. We said 3 a few days ago. We meant 0. 3 meant 0. You get that math? 3 equals 0. So let's talk about who is behaving differently. Also, take a look at this mixed message. The president always says he supports a two-state solution, but now Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is saying, we don't actually. He says Palestinians should just carve out a homeland out of Muslim country. They have a ton more land. Just go there. Just they speak your language. The culture is similar. Get the heck out. Go. Find somewhere else. Invade them, I guess, is what he's saying. And he confirmed that he said the U.S. no longer supports an independent Palestinian state. Now, Iran has said they will have a nuclear weapon. No, they did not say that. I'm sorry. Pretend I didn't say that. Iran has said it will have nuclear power for non-weapons purposes, and that they have complied with the UN body, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency. That agency will vote on whether or not to declare that Iran is in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is so weird. Why does this require a vote? I mean, either Iran is compliant or they're not. Making that decision based on a vote seems, dare I say it, political. It's like voting on the solution to a math problem. That's not how it works. Joining us to discuss is Dan McAdams. He's the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute. So what do you think of all of these mixed messages? Does 2 + 2 = 4? Or we're not sure. What do you think?
Well, I'll tell you guys, this is a weird day, and I've been monitoring things in all the places I monitor. And on the heels of President Trump saying Iran is acting much differently, which, as you point out, came at the end after he had his discussion with Netanyahu, which we were led to believe was him getting tough with Netanyahu, but it doesn't sound that way. Acting much differently, they've held the same position since the very beginning, which is that we don't want a bomb. We're not building a bomb. The CIA says we're not building a bomb, but we do have the right to civilian nuclear energy. So where is the difference? Maybe they were rude. I don't know what. But there's something strange going on because as you pointed out, not only are there press reports that the American embassy in Iraq is being evacuated of all non-essential personnel, but every other military base in the region is being evacuated. There was a major hearing on Capitol Hill scheduled tomorrow with CENTCOM Director General Kurilla, which has been postponed. There are a number of other things, even down to intense GPS jamming by Iran over Iraq, that point to the fact that something may be brewing right now. It may be Israel going into Iran or attacking Iran on its own. It could be the U.S. and Israel together. I find that slightly hard to believe. Nevertheless, something is definitely now. Maybe it's all a big psyop to get us all freaked out. You never know, but something big is happening within the last couple of hours, guys.
So you just gave me chills, and a lot of people in the chat room saying let Israel deal with Iran, but it's not as simple as that, is it? Because letting Israel deal with Iran, we have over 50,000 American soldiers in that region who would be hit, and because those weapons that Israel's using, it's not as simple as, oh, Israel, just use your own weapons. These are American weapons that we know, and Tucker has confirmed that these weapons are also being sold off to China and given to China. So not an ally of the United States, but letting Israel just deal with this is a huge problem for the U.S., no?
And also, don't forget, I mean, we just found out Netanyahu announced that they're actually supporting militias that are ISIS to fight against Hamas. So ISIS is also getting our weapons there. But I think one of the things, possible triggers for this intense period of activity right now in the area is that the defense minister of Iran announced, I believe it was yesterday or earlier today, that if Israel attacks Iran, Iran will attack every U.S. base in the region. Now, if you look at a map, there, there's a lot of those maps saying, here's Iran, and they put their country right in the middle of our bases. Each one of those bases, if you could count dozens of them. So if that's the case, obviously, because we saw what happened on October 1st of 24, when Iran retaliated against Israel, and they took out that military base and the intel facility inside Israel. We saw the explosion. They clearly have the capability of doing this. So I think this trigger was the defense minister saying, we will hit these bases of the Americans. And as you pointed out, I've heard as many as 80,000 American troops. What on God's earth would happen? Now, politics aside, but to America, if we lost 100, 1,000, maybe add a 0 or 2 Americans in an instant because Israel decided it's better attack Iran now before the U.S. makes a deal. This is a disaster brewing.
I mean, you talk about a PSYOP. I'm sorry, you just
Yeah.
got me thinking PSYOP, and I'm thinking now my brain goes down this rabbit hole because we've all been played so many times, whether it's the USS Liberty or the Gulf of Tonkin. We've all been played like pawns. You know it. We see all these protests across the United States. America's focused on all these protests right now. All these NGOs that are out in force right now, organizing everything, getting us all fired up for June 14th. Then you talk about the Middle East about to explode. Are we being duped right now? Like, look over here, don't look over here?
It's a great point. And it could very well be the case. The next round of U.S.-Iranian talks is scheduled for Sunday. So if you want to do something to scuttle those or to get America's attention away from what's happening, you're right. I mean, and everyone is focused. You see the streets on fire. You see what personally pisses me off more than anything. You see the looting of all these stores, destruction. It does tend to make Americans, obviously it should, it's closer to home. But that's a perfect time if you're devious, like certain leaders that we know in the Middle East. Right. If you're devious, you're going to take advantage of that. Boom.
Now, what do you think the reaction would be in America if Israel bombed Iran and that reverberated on American lives? Would people then support a war with Iran, or would they say, hey, Israel got us,
attacked?
Yeah. Americans don't pay attention to the nuance enough.
Would we put yellow ribbons around our trees like the Gulf War and, rally our support?
Totally. That's exactly the media blitz would be unbelievable. We would have to do some kind of something to funnel people over to the redacted so they get the truth. But man, the blitz is going to be crazy. If a few Americans die over there, it's going to be crazy, and everyone's going to want to go to war with Iran. But this is not Iraq in 2002. Iran is a very, very different can of worms, very sophisticated, very large country, very complicated geography, and very sophisticated weapon system. This will be a disaster if it happens. And as you pointed out early on, I'm sorry, Natalie, just as you pointed out early on, Trump could stop this. He could just be consistent and say, no, Bibi, I'm not going to be like Biden and be wishy-washy. Gosh, I wish you guys weren't doing that. It really upsets me. Just say no, stop it. That would end it.
Yeah. You have a firm hand. Absolutely right. Now, Haaretz reported that Iranian media is going to release documents about Israel's nuclear program, which, the United States politicians pretend they don't know about. And so could that actually scare us into reality? Because politicians know, but try not to know. So would this force the world to know that this is actually dangerous? This is a nuclear, they are guilty of proliferation?
Actually, I was watching these things escalate today, and I was trying to think what are the multitude of factors that could be leading Israel to try to attack Iran, if that's indeed the case. And one of the ones I was thinking about is these documents. Apparently, we're talking multi-terabytes of information, and not just about Israel's nuclear program, but very specific geographic locations of very top secret facilities in Iran or in Israel. And if that is the case, maybe if they've just gotten these documents, have not had the opportunity to completely analyze them, maybe Israel feels like we have got to hit Iran now before they are really able to reconfigure their weapon systems to take out these places that they're now learning about. I don't know. It's just a speculation on my part.
Yeah. When I saw this, it was buried at the end of a Haaretz article. And I was like, wait, what? we're not being warned about this document release. That's being hidden from us in the West.
The mainstream media totally ignored this story. You had to literally find it on our sources on Telegram. I mean, it's buried.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a massive thread on X about, without going into very specifics, but in a general way, what kinds of information was intercepted. And it is incredible. The detail is incredible.
Well, it's worth remembering. I bring this up all the time. Mordecai Vanunu is an Israeli who blew the whistle in the 80s about the Israeli nuclear program, and they put him in prison for decades and tortured him. And he has requested asylum, and no Western country will take him because they don't want to piss off Israel. He is still an Israeli political prisoner. And so, I mean, it's worth knowing his name because he's been trying to warn us about this. Go ahead, Clayton.
No. I mean, Daniel, we'll just get you out of here on this because I know you've been watching this closely. When you say something big is happening right now in the Middle East, I mean, put on your speculation hat here. What do you think we're seeing? What do you think we're going to see maybe over the next few hours, next 24 hours?
Well, I hope it's a psyop, to be honest with you. But it looks to me like Israel wants to attack Iran, and they want to do it before this next round of talks on Sunday between the U.S. and Iran. They want to do it before some of this intel is used to counter Iran. And it looks, at least to me, like they want to do it quickly, and they feel confident that the U.S. Congress, which, by the way, the U.S. is not its first concern, it's a different country, that the U.S. Congress will pressure President Trump sufficiently to force the U.S. military to backstop Israel in this unprovoked attack on Iran.
Well, I don't like that, but hopefully we survive the weekend without that happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. And I just, I'm worried about this psychological. Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
I just want to chime in. I have a quick question, but like, if that happens, if Israel does attack Iran, regionally, what happens? Does Pakistan get involved then? Because I mean, that's a nuclear country. How bad can this get, and how quickly? Turkey, in that region, how bad could it get, and how quickly?
Very quickly, because if Iran targets all bases, it's going to be taking things out in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be taking out the oil fields in Saudi Arabia. We're going to be paying $15, $20, $30 a gallon for gasoline. It's going to tank the U.S. economy. It's going to throw the Sunni states into an absolute uproar. It's going to cause places like Lebanon to explode, Syria to explode. It's really, this is a big can of gasoline, and Bibi is over there with this match lit, and he's trying to attach it to the gasoline.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, well, that was cheerful. It's good to see you, Dan.
Thank you, Daniel. Great to see you.
Happy Father's Day, Clayton. Hopefully you both.
For joining us. I have lost my audio of you, but I know you're out there somewhere. Colonel, are you satisfied, before we get to how close is the United States with war against Iran, are you satisfied with the denials of President Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth that the U.S. did not know about the Ukrainian drone attack before it started?
Well, I think that it's possible that President Trump did not understand what the attack was all about. But as far as Hegseth is concerned, no, I don't believe anything the man says. But I think President Trump may not have been adequately briefed. And even if he received a briefing, he may not have been told what the implications were for the attack. I mean, very few people today ever bring up the strategic arms limitations talks. And they forget that we continue to observe these agreements that we made with the Soviet Union. Now, some of them we've bailed out of, but we have not bailed out of the SALT talks. So I think President Trump may be telling the truth, but I don't think Secretary Hegseth is. By the way, Secretary Hegseth made some sort of comment that he watched it all in real time, Judge. He said that.
Here is Here is the comment, as inexplicable as it is, Colonel. It is clear that he's denying. No, Chris, I hear feedback on myself. I don't know why. It is clear that he's denying that he knew about it ahead of time. It is unclear if he's talking about watching this drone attack or all drone attacks. Chris, cut number 10.
Are we seeing the ushering in of a new era of warfare? The use of drones from afar. After all, these drones were smuggled into Russia, hidden for a great span of time, and then activated from 2,500 miles away. Are we prepared, both defensively and offensively? Mr. Secretary.
It was a daring and very effective operation that we were not aware of in advance and reflects significant advancements in drone warfare, which we are tracking in real time inside Ukraine.
What do you think?
I think the man is not being entirely truthful. I think he knew it was coming. He may not have known all the details, but he knew the essential features of it. And this question of has this new in warfare? It's so frustrating when you deal with both general officers as well as people that know nothing about the military. They have a very static view of warfare. Warfare is always changing. It's never the same. I guess it was Einstein that was once approached by one of his students or assistants and said, Professor, you asked the same set of questions on the most recent test that you did a year ago in the same class. And he said, why did you do that? What's changed? And Einstein allegedly said, well, the answers have changed. And I think that's the problem that we have with everybody on military affairs. The military battlefield, the environment is always changing. But I think Hegseth undoubtedly was aware that this was happening. Maybe he didn't understand the implications. I don't think Hegseth knows anything about the strategic arms limitation talks. I'd be surprised if he did.
Why were the Russian planes out in the open?
So that our satellites can monitor them and we can detect whether or not they are actually carrying nuclear weapons. We know where the weapons are stored in proximity to the airfields, so we can see the bunkers where the weapons are stored. And we can also detect emissions. This is done on both sides. We do the same thing in the Midwest and all over the place because we want the Russians to know that we're not planning to nuke them. I mean, that's what it boils down to.
Did the United States monitor this in real time?
Yes. Or as our satellite passes, we have a schedule, and we know when the satellites are going over. They know when our satellites are looking, so they're purposely on display so that there is no question in anyone's mind about where are they? Are they loaded for bear? Are they going into action? Are they not? All of these things have to be made clear. And this is the beauty of overhead surveillance and space-based surveillance. We can monitor all of these things. Now, if the Russians had suddenly stopped displaying these aircraft and they disappeared into the ether, that would be a violation of the treaties. But they've never done that. We've never done that.
So, Colonel, my apologies. I'm now back with you. We had a little bit of an issue. Isn't it crazy for him to say we didn't know about this and yet we monitored it in real time?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should have been more honest, but the honest answer from him, I think, would probably have been, yeah, we knew about it. We didn't understand the implications, and therefore I made a mistake. No one in power wants to admit that. So the default position is, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I have no recollection of that, Senator, that kind of thing.
Here's Foreign Minister Lavrov. I'm going to ask you what you think the Kremlin thinks, but here's what he says the Kremlin thinks. 100% the British and probably the Americans. Chris, cut number 8.
It is obvious that the Ukrainian side is doing everything possible, but it would be absolutely helpless without the support, I was tempted to say Anglo-Saxons, but probably without Saxons, just without the support of the British. Although you never know, probably by inertia, some US special forces would be involved in that. But the British actually are behind all those things, I'm 100% sure.
So Ritter says that means that he has intel demonstrating the certainty of what he said. Our friend Professor Doctorow says this is an attempt to mislead. The British had nothing to do with it.
Well, perhaps Professor Doctorow has access to intelligence the rest of us do not. I don't know. Frankly, I'm not privileged to read the intelligence feeds that come out every morning that the president and everybody else at the top of the administration gets to look at if they pay attention. What I would say is this, that the British frequently, and the SAS as an arm of MI6, has done things that we would not do. We said, no, we can't do that. We can't expose ourselves. So the British have stepped up and said, we'll do it. We know the SAS pulled off a number of actions against the Russians almost from the beginning of the war, several times in different places. We've had action from the sea, in the Black Sea, against Russian targets. So I think it's reasonable to assume that the British had a role in this. And of course, they're by far the most vocal advocates for direct confrontation with the Russians. Now, as far as we're concerned, we have tried to be more careful about exposing ourselves, particularly our own special ops on the ground. So I think that's unlikely that we had any Americans involved. On the other hand, again, we have by far the leading array of surveillance, intelligence, collection assets in space in the world. And that array doesn't miss much. And so I'm sure that we monitored all of this and tracked it as it was developing in real time, as Secretary Hegseth said.
Would President Putin be within the law to retaliate against Great Britain?
Well, I suppose you can make that argument. I think President Putin, once again, as we've discussed before, has always tried to do everything in his power not to provoke the United States and NATO into attacking him. He doesn't want a war.
Right.
And I think that will continue. Now, could he do something? Well, there are a number of things that he could do. The question that he has to ask is, how does that help his war effort? Does it make any real difference? I think he'll probably conclude it wouldn't make any real difference. And if you look at the state of affairs in Great Britain right now, as this Professor David Betts recently outlined, it's pretty close to internal revolution. So again, if you're President Putin, why would you want to interrupt that?
Right, right. Let your enemy destroy himself. Colonel, who controls American foreign policy?
Oh boy, I think that we have, first of all, these words, the deep state, always bother me, because people say, well, that's the bureaucracy. Well, my own experience with the so-called federal bureaucracy, in whatever form you want to approach it, military, intelligence, or anything else, is certainly in the grip of a lot of inertia. In other words, to give you a quick example, after '92, when it became abundantly clear that the Soviet Union was crumbling and there was no threat whatsoever from the Soviet side against the West, we continued to do the things, we continued to observe the things, track the things, watch the things that we had done for 30, 40 years during the Cold War. In other words, nothing really changed. So in that sense, I think you've got a bureaucracy that's very, very resistant to changing, to adopt a new position or new perspectives. But when you say who actually controls foreign policy, I think today we have to say clearly oligarchic billionaires who are mega donors, who have effectively bought the Hill. And when I say bought the Hill, I mean buy it through contributions. And they've also made it clear, if you look at the 4 stars that are out there that have retired, those who have been most vocal in their advocacy for conflict and confrontation with the Russians, with the Chinese, with Iran, they are very wealthy men, because they have been hired into firms in New York City, financial firms that reward them for their continued commitment to conflict overseas. And you also have people that are employed in various so-called think tanks, which is kind of an oxymoron. I think they're just advocacy tanks, which is, I think, what Chaz Freeman likes to call them. So I think you have to look at the sources of the money. And people say AIPAC. Well, AIPAC is not involved in everything, but it's involved in a lot. But it is focused really like a laser on what they think is the international Jewish interest, not just Israel, but the larger diaspora's interest. So it would be wrong to say that they control foreign policy, but they have a huge impact. And there are others with a lot of money in Washington, D.C. that have an impact as well.
So is the likely?
I don't think the president of the United States is a free agent.
Is it a likely scenario that elements of the CIA knew about this? The director did not. The director of national intelligence did not. The secretary of defense probably did. And nobody told the president of the United States.
I can't speak for Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know what she's aware of as the director of national intelligence because she has a lot on her plate, so to say. But clearly, Radcliffe would have known everything, I would suspect, from the beginning. And I don't know who briefs the president. You'll recall that when President Trump was in office the first time around and Mr. Pompeo was appointed to head the CIA, he personally came across to the White House every morning to brief President Trump. And he did that for various reasons. Obviously, he was cultivating him because he wanted to exploit Trump for as much as he could get out of him on his road to the presidency, or at least at the time, so he thought. But I would think that the CIA director very definitely was aware. I would think that the National Security Advisor, whoever that is, would be aware. And I guess at this point, that's Marco Rubio. So if Marco Rubio is actually involved in doing the job on the National Security Council staff, he would have known.
Do you think that President Putin, and then I want to jump to Israel and Iran, do you think President Putin will respond to all of this with drama and ferocity, or do you think he'll continue his slow, patient, methodical, winning ways?
This is a very important question because conditions have changed. The Ukrainian military establishment is in ruins. It doesn't present much resistance any longer. Tens and thousands of Ukrainian troops are being slaughtered every week as they try to withdraw, disengage, and avoid contact with the Russians. There are undoubtedly discussions right now at the highest levels in Moscow between President Putin, his advisors, and I would think the general staff. And I think the tenor of the discussion is as follows. Do we continue on our current path, or do we strike decisively? And when I mean strike, I'm not talking about missiles and rockets, because I think it should have become pretty clear at this point that regardless of how many missiles you launch, how many rockets are launched, and how many critical infrastructure targets are destroyed or people may be killed, that's not going to end the war, because Mr. Zelensky will sit quietly in his bunker in Kiev. He'll collect whatever cash is sent his way. He'll do whatever he can to maintain the fiction that Ukraine is a real nation state, which I don't think it is anymore, and that he is in control of something, when in reality he controls Kiev and he controls some of the weapon systems that can reach into Russia, but not too much else. So I think the question is, what do we do? Do we keep doing what we're doing, or do we move into Kiev and take the city? Do we cross the river, go down to Odessa, turn Ukraine's rump state into a landlocked state, which is important because most of the arms and support that comes to Ukraine, perhaps most is a strong word, but an awful lot of it comes from the sea, from the Black Sea. And then finally, he's already made a decision to send 10,000 more Russian troops to Moldova, to the Transnistrian Republic, which is Russian, in the southern and eastern part of Moldova. Well, that's a stone's throw from Odessa. So if he's going to do that, he might as well just take Odessa. He's not going to get an agreement out of anybody. Nobody's going to sign up for anything right now. So why sit quietly and hurl missiles at Ukraine when Ukraine is already defeated? I think that's the discussion that's going on.
Right.
I'd be surprised if there were any other kind of discussion.
Is the United States preparing for war against Iran? as we speak?
Well, if you if you listen to General Kurilla's testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, I think that's what it was. He went to great lengths to assure everyone that we are in fact prepared for war with Iran, and that he has presented a number of options. He didn't go into any detail, and he conveyed the impression that he's ready and willing to fight. Now, that could just be for the AIPAC audience, because he wants to end up like Generals Keane or Petraeus as millionaires in firms in New York City. And the way to do that is to swear allegiance publicly to AIPAC. And that means you go to places like the Institute for the Defense of Democracy and tell everybody how much you love Israel and how you're ready to fight Iran forever. That's what General McKenzie did. Everybody that wants to be a four-star, wants to be rewarded, wants to grow rich does that. Now, that could be it, but I think we have to take what he says very seriously. And I think we are ready to do whatever is required in terms of support for Israel if that war should break out.
Here's Congressman Mike Rogers, an arch neocon, and General Michael Kurilla in the conversation of which you just spoke, cut number 11, Chris.
President Trump's made it clear that if Iran doesn't permanently give up its nuclear enrichment, military force by the U.S. may be necessary. If the president directed, is CENTCOM prepared to respond with overwhelming force to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran?
I have provided the Secretary of Defense and the President a wide range of options.
I take that as a yes.
Yes.
There you have it. Whatever his motivation may be, whether it's personal or ideological. Hasn't the administration gone back and forth on all of this? We read in Haaretz that President Trump said to Netanyahu, back off, don't even consider attacking Iran. We read in Haaretz that President Trump was going to allow the same level of enrichment as the original agreement did, the one that he withdrew from in his first term. Do you have a handle on where all of that sits now, Colonel?
If you listen to the Iranians, one of their chief negotiators made the following statement. He said, you can have the agreement effectively as stipulated. I think it was a maximum of 3.2% or 3.2% enrichment.
Right.
For purely civilian interests or civilian purposes. And he said, but as soon as we arrive at any sort of agreement, the administration suffers from what he called the Bibi effect. In other words, a call from Netanyahu comes in and says, unacceptable, no enrichment. Then suddenly President Trump comes up online and says, no enrichment, and the entire agreement is scrapped. So I think he's right about the Bibi effect. And the Bibi effect is very real. And of course, Senator Rogers, no doubt, is 100% in favor of the Bibi effect. So under those circumstances, I think we have to conclude that we're not going to get an agreement with the Iranians, period. So if there's not going to be an agreement, the next question is what happens? Well, you and I have talked about this before. We both know that President Trump does not want a war with Iran. In fact, President Trump doesn't want a war with anybody. That's pretty clear to me. That was clear to me in 2020. That's one of the reasons I voted for the man. But does that make a difference? And you're back to your other question. Then who's really controlling things? And my personal opinion is that the potential for the Israelis to do something on their own that then requires us to intervene in support of them on the assumption that if we don't, they are at real risk of being destroyed themselves is real. That could happen. And I think that is still the most likely scenario. The idea that we're all going to get together and midnight on Friday attack Iran is nonsense. That's not the way it'll go down. I think something is much more likely to happen as a consequence of Israeli action or planning, and then we are dragged in.
Here's former Ambassador Kurt Volker 2 days ago on this very topic. Chris, cut number 7.
At what point does Israel do something about it?
Well, I think we're getting closer and closer to that day. But now they're seeing the negotiation going on between the U.S. and Iran, including reportedly a proposal that Iran would be able to continue enriching uranium. Well, that's a non-starter for Israel, and I think for good reason. And if that remains part of what we're negotiating, if that becomes agreed, I think Israel will want to step in with its own capability.
Does the Donald Trump, for whom you voted, have the courage to say to Netanyahu, go take a hike? We're agreeing to 3.2 enrichment. They have the right to use nuclear power to heat their homes and to run the sophisticated equipment in hospitals that everybody uses today.
The answer to that one is, I think, no. Now, President Trump was taken aback somewhat when he discovered that the Russians are negotiating for a contract that would result in the building of several nuclear power stations on the ground in Iran.
Yeah, 8.
And the Russians have been very upfront about that. I think that was actually mentioned by President Putin to President Trump. So then the question is, if that's true, and I think it is, and you are Netanyahu, you are approaching the 11th hour. Either you strike or you'll end up in a position where you can't possibly have an impact anymore. The question for President Trump is, can he stay out of it? And I don't think he can. It's interesting when I talk to people about Iran, one of the things that I hear when I talk to people on the Hill or others who call themselves analysts in the field, it's as though nothing has changed in 46 years since the Iranian Revolution. Well, Judge, you and I know that's not true. Iran is a very different country today from what it was 46 years ago.
Right.
And it is not what it is depicted as being, as this dangerous revolutionary force. I remember people comparing the regime in Iran at the time of the revolution to the Bolsheviks in Moscow. And the Bolsheviks, of course, immediately struck out to enlarge their control of everything they could. They marched into Poland. Their goal was to march to Germany. They had to reconquer vast areas in, Central Asia. And so people said, look, they're going to be like the Bolsheviks. We have to stop them dead in their tracks. Well, that was not true. Eventually, Saddam Hussein started a war with them. We subsidized him. We supported him. That war went very, very badly. And Iran emerged from it. Stronger, I would argue, than it was when it went in. In Iran today is not a nation of religious fanatics, and nobody over there is anxious to kill Jews, contrary to what everybody in Israel thinks. And in fact, on the contrary, I would say that if anything, the Iranians are singularly disinterested in this ongoing spat between Israel and its neighbors. But it's unavoidably dragged in when its co-religionists, such as the Shiites in southern Lebanon, become targets. So the bottom line is, no, I think I'm quite certain that President Trump doesn't want it. The question is, can he really prevent it? How much does he control? How many people on the Hill can he count on? In other words, it's back to the question of sit down with me, JD, and let's go through the roster of senators. How many senators do I control? How many senators does Bibi Netanyahu control? And right now, I would argue that Mr. Netanyahu has greater influence and greater control over the Senate than President Trump does.
Here's the president on Monday talking about enrichment. Yet again, cut number 12.
What's the main impediment to getting a deal? Well, they're just asking for things that you can't do. They don't want to give up what they have to give up. You know what that is. They seek enrichment. We can't have enrichment. We want just the opposite. And so far, they're not there. I hate to say that because the alternative is a very, very dire one, but they're not there. They have given us their thoughts on the deal. And I said, it's just not acceptable.
I guess he had just gotten off the phone with Netanyahu. I don't want to be cynical, but the administration's chief negotiator, who led all of us to believe he had a deal when enrichment was around 3.2, Steve Witkoff, A, has disappeared from the scene, and B, has made statements diametrically opposed to what the president just said.
Well, I can't evaluate Witkoff. He's in a strange position. He's not really a diplomat. He's not formally a member of the administration. He's a close personal friend. And I think he's done for his friend all that he can do. And I think he's probably said that. So we're at an impasse. That's the point. And how do you get out of the impasse? I think that Mr. Netanyahu wants the strikes to go forward against Iran. And I think he's prepared to do that. And again, under the circumstances, I don't think we would lead it, but I think we could easily be dragged in to support it and ultimately into a war with Iran and potentially a lot of other people that we don't want to go to war with. Now, this business of what's acceptable and what isn't. If you are going to buy the Israeli argument that Iran is what it was 46 years ago, and if they're given a weapon, they're immediately going to nuke everybody in sight, well, then you have to do anything and everything to stop that. But if you see Iran very differently as it is, as opposed to what the Israelis say it is, then the possibility that Iran is enriching uranium for civilian use should not be threatening to anybody. I mean, where do you draw the line? Did we immediately draw the line on India and Pakistan? And to be perfectly blunt, Judge, I think if you look at Pakistan, you can make an argument that that place is a lot less stable and predictable than Iran. A hell of a lot.
How you live Pakistan?
Nobody ever brings it up. It doesn't seem to matter.
Fanatics.
And I think we're back to the bottom line, which is Israel wants a monopoly of control over nuclear weapons. If it doesn't have that monopoly, that means it actually has to talk to, negotiate with, and get along with its neighbors. It doesn't want to do that. It wants the upper hand. It wants to hold that whip hand in perpetuity against everyone in the region. And if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that breaks the impasse. That changes in their minds strategically what they can do. Their freedom of action is now constrained. By the way, Judge, our freedom of action was constrained as soon as the Soviets managed to explode a nuclear weapon. You remember that very, very clearly. As soon as they had a weapon, suddenly the world changed. And we've lived with that ever since. And China is another one. Remember, Brezhnev actually proposed to Richard Nixon a joint nuclear strike on China's nuclear facilities. We must not allow these Chinese to have a nuclear weapon. And Nixon wisely said, no, we're not we're not launching an unprovoked strike against China under any circumstances. So I think Nixon was right. And I think that right now, Trump knows that this is not something we want to do, but I'm not sure he can stop it.
Wouldn't a serious nuclear arsenal in the hands of the Iran government be the best thing for stability in the Middle East?
I don't know. I mean, that's a question that has to be answered. But I do think there's an alternative that has been considered in the past that has been outright rejected by the Israelis. And that is to make the entire region nuclear free. And everybody in the region would sign up for it except the Israelis. And that would have been the best solution. To the extent we can make vast areas of the planet nuclear free, we ought to try and do it.
Right.
Just as you and I have talked about this before, I'm an advocate for a no first use doctrine, unambiguous, straightforward. President Trump should state it publicly. He and President Putin and President Xi should get together and say no first strike. We oppose that. There will be no first use by our countries under any circumstance. So I think that would be very good for the world, but I don't see it happening. Do you?
The Israelis will never agree to it.
No.
Colonel, thank you very much. Thanks for letting me go all across the board here. Very, very
anyone on. Now, my first guest this evening is, frankly, the best known, world famous, independent journalist and geopolitical analyst anywhere on the planet. I keep trying to get him on the show, and now I've got him sitting right next to me at my desk. He is, of course, Pepe Escobar. Alado Perts, as we say in Scotland, a man of many dimensions. I've just read an article by you quoting Nietzsche, which doesn't happen every day in everyday journalism.
No, it doesn't.
But it's a brilliant quote. There are no facts, only interpretations. The proximate reason for your quoting him was the incredible dedication that governments, parliaments, ministers in the West have to fact-checking, when what we actually know is they are making sure that only one interpretation of the facts, their interpretation, is the one that people are allowed to see. Speak to that first, Pepe, if you will.
Well, George, it's an enormous honor to be with you.
Thank you,
I have admired you for ages. I'm just a pilgrim, and I'm a part of a dying breed. I'm one of the last foreign correspondents active around the world.
It's true.
This year is my 40th year as a foreign correspondent. Wow. Guess where my first post? London.
Was it?
I wanted to be in London when I was very, very
40
young.
40 years ago,
yes.
So that's
it was
85.
Reagan Gorbachev. You remember very well, of course. So can you imagine a young journalist, okay, now I am at the center of the world, because London at the time was part of the center of the world, right? Yeah. So I learned on the way, like, you know, those Chinese, Buddhist, and Taoist pilgrims. You're always learning, you know, and I'm glad that I can show a little bit, especially for younger generations, and talk about these past 40 years, especially what happened. But Nietzsche, it's personal as well. I was supposed to do a PhD on Nietzsche at the Sorbonne in France. And guess what I did? I decided to go to London to see the Clash and the Jam playing live.
That may have been the wisest thing to do.
I think it was a wise decision.
Yes.
But I used Nietzsche because we are in the post-truth era.
Yeah.
As American conceptualizers define it, in fact, the people who used to do critical theory in American universities, now they call everything post-truth. Was postmodernism before, now it's post-truth. And as you mentioned in your introduction, there's only one truth available and imposed and suggested, their truth. So this connects to the fact that there is no truth, only interpretations, but there's only one interpretation now. So the version of post-truth is the version of only one interpretation, their interpretation. If you are a government, if you are an activist, like our friends were at the flotilla that went to Gaza.
Now in the dungeon.
And now they are in a dungeon, including the Brazilian guy, he's a brilliant.
Tiago.
Tiago is a brilliant guy.
Wonderful. He's on hunger strike too.
He's on a hunger strike, exactly. So they're not part of the truth, and their interpretation is null and void. And who defines which interpretation is the right one? Essentially, governments, NGOs, and large institutions like the European Union, which
NGOs, which are really GOs, because they're paid by the government.
Paid by governments, exactly. And Kafkaesque institutions like the European Union and European Commission, especially. The European Commission is one of the most nefarious institutions in modern history.
Indeed so.
In fact. And I cannot say pleasure, but I have the displeasure to know many members because some of them were actually my friends. And to give an idea, George, some of my ex-friends, they actually redact Russian sanctions, and they are proud of it. And they advertise that they redact Russian sanctions without knowing anything about Russia on top of that. They are only thinking about their pensions when they retire with a full pension, full salary, no taxes, and they can go to Thailand.
Yeah. We're here, Pepe, in what Musk Sr. Called the greatest capital city in the world.
Correct.
Not by a short distance, but by a mile.
By a mile, yes.
And you and I know that to be true,
yes,
because we're here. But of course, the rest of the population is told not to come here, threatened with sanction if they come here, and of course deliberately deceived about what life is like here in Russia for the purposes of the war drive. Now, I was, some may say, a trifle apocalyptic in my monologue, but I was moved to be so by Tulsi Gabbard's experience today at Hiroshima, which she partially passed on to the rest of us, though we could see in her face how badly it had affected her. It is astounding, isn't it, for people your age and mine? We lived in a time where practically everybody knew the horror of potential nuclear war. Now it seems hardly anybody does. They're ready to risk it willy-nilly.
To give an idea, George, I was having dinner with our mutual friend Larry Johnson yesterday night.
Good friend of ours.
Exactly. And we were also discussing the possibility of nuclear war and the possibility of what might lead to nuclear war, which apparently there is now a standing order for a lot of American military bases vis-a-vis a possible attack on Iran. Iran has already said multiple times, if that happens, our response is going to be devastating. It won't be nuclear. They don't even need it. I was in Iran 2 months ago, and we even talked to brigadier general level of the IRGC, and they said, no, we still have a few cards on our sleeve that we haven't demonstrated yet. So this could be even more than Ukraine. Iran could be the stepping stone towards a nuclear conflagration, because the Israelis are, depending on their
Iranian threatening it.
Exactly. Let's suppose a plausible chain of events. Nobody wants it, but it's plausible. Trump already told Netanyahu, don't attack Iran because we're trying to get a diplomatic deal. The problem is Netanyahu, as you know very well, is on the ropes now. There's only one way out for him, a war. And guess where? Against the #1 power in West Asia as a whole. So let's say a unilateral attack. By the way, they don't have the weaponry for this unilateral attack. But in desperation, let's assume a unilateral attack. The Iranian response could erase a great deal of Israel, including Dimona. They already said, we will bomb Israel nuclear installations. And Israeli response could be a nuclear attack on Iran. And then all the other major players would be involved, including the US, Russia, of course, not China, but the US, Russia, and the Europeans, certainly.
And all of the West's allies in the principalities in the Gulf would, of course, be devastated.
Devastated.
By the blast, by the fallout, by the nuclear winter, the American bases in these principalities. It's already stated.
It's already stated by Iran many times, yes.
So even though Trump doesn't seem to want Netanyahu to do this, if Netanyahu does it, it brings Trump in.
Of course. And the overall problem, in fact, we were discussing this with Larry and one of my very well-informed Russian friends yesterday night. We all know that the President of the United States does not rule US foreign policy. You know that very well by your experience. We journalists, we learn along the way, and many of us who live in Washington, we learn when we see how Washington works, right? At the moment, the big question for, let's say, SVR here in Russia, FSB, people of the Russian Security Council, the Russian think tanks, it's still for them, they are obsessed with one question. How come he was bypassed in the drone attack, theoretically only conducted by Kiev against the strategic bombers? It's absolutely impossible, they know that. But they want to establish the chain of command, and they want to establish, was it a CIA silo? Was it an MI6 silo? Was a combination of rogue factions of CIA, MI6 with input from Mossad and then all the way to the SBU? This is what they are analyzing 24/7 for over a week now. And that's why they have been relatively silent. I'm sure you noticed that from the beginning, okay, let's wait and see. And that discombobulated the other side completely, because the original idea for this provocation, okay, there's going to be a harsh response, which could even be nuclear, by Russia, and they're going to abandon the table in Istanbul. None of that happened. So their plan collapsed in less than 48 hours, because the Russians already know what the response will be. But first, as I'm sure you've seen these days you've been here, Putin has to officially transform the SMO into a CTO, a counter-terrorist operation. This has to go through the Duma. The Duma ratifies it. And from then on, it's going to be the Russian Federation against a terrorist rogue regime in Kiev. And then all bets are off. And that's where we're going at the moment.
Yeah, it's Russia Day, as you know, tomorrow.
Russia Day, exactly.
And I think this evening there's a very high-level meeting in the Kremlin.
Very important.
In fact, Putin has moved back into the Kremlin.
Exactly.
And there may be significant developments coming. What's your thoughts on what they might be?
I'm very curious, all of us. Next week on Friday, so Friday afternoon next week, it's going to be the plenary session of the St. Petersburg Forum. And guess who will deliver the address? Putin. And then there's going to be a Q&A. Everybody's waiting for this Q&A, because we all know that, the tone of the questions.
I know everybody that you meet here has a view. There are people in Russia, not many, who are ready to say that they're opposed to the war.
Mm-hmm.
But the main dichotomy is between those who think the war is not being prosecuted harshly enough and those who are ready to trust Putin's judgment and calibration of what level of force and force numbers is required. I feel that I've met, it could just be chance, more people on this visit who think the war is not being prosecuted harshly enough than ever before in all the times I've been here. In fact, people are openly saying to me that this should have all been done in 2014 when the coup occurred and when the Russian people, Russian-speaking people, Russian nationals living in the east of Ukraine were placed in extreme jeopardy, that Russia should have acted in 2014. But that when it did act, it should have ended the war quickly, rather than Putin says he was naive in believing in the Istanbul process as he had earlier believed in the Minsk process.
Exactly.
Well, you can't get away in Russia for that long by saying you were naive. Eventually, the people are going to say, stop being naive.
Exactly. And very good point, George. You know that I start spending almost half of the year in Russia in 2023. So this past 2.5 years, I've been here half a year, and this year already almost 3 months. I was listening from the beginning from businessmen, not diplomats or think tanks. This is an almost war, their own words in Russian. Instant translation to English, almost war. And you were listening, guys linked to big state companies or big banks, including people who are in Alpha Bank or VTB or Sberbank, executives. And now, as you mentioned, we are beyond the pale. It's bring on the Oreshniks.
That's what they say.
It's changed
completely. Is on everybody's
exactly.
I was at a table this week with, obviously I can't identify them, but with 3 billionaires, with a minor member of the former royal family here, and with other important Russian personalities, and the word Orishnik was on everybody's lips.
Yes.
For how long are you going to... St. Petersburg today had a drone attack on it. It was shot out of the sky. But what if it had landed on the Hermitage? What if it had landed on a crowd of foreign tourists, which
Yes.
it might well have done?
Yes.
How long are you going to allow Air Force bases to be targeted by these terrorist attacks before you put an end to them? And Russia is perfectly capable of putting an end to them.
They could have done it. In fact, they could have done it from the beginning in 2022. Let's have a diplomatic negotiating process. I was in Istanbul at the time. The Turks we did it. They have a deal. It lasted, as you remember, a few hours, right? Medinsky said something extraordinary.
He's the chief Russian negotiator.
Chief Russian negotiator. He's a historian. He's an extremely well-prepared diplomat, historian and diplomat. He said something extraordinary. Look, at the time we were telling them, look, why don't you be like Austria? You can have an army, but you can be like Austria. You can be semi-neutral or neutral. It's the best deal for you. This was in the first negotiation, the Istanbul negotiation. And he compared the demeanor of the team, the Ukrainian team at the time, in 2022, with what's been happening this past few weeks. It's basically was saying, now they look scared. Or they're saying, look, you have one boss, I have three. So this means, I cannot tell you anything. You know, I have to clear with three different instances. And they know that the next deal, the next offer is going to be devastating. Like Medinsky let it know in the first Istanbul meeting, it's not going to be 4 regions, it's going to be 8.
Yeah.
And that's where they're going. And when you compare to, just one second, George, when you compare with what the commanders are saying on the ground, I'll give you an example. For our audience, it's important for perspective. I was in Donbass in February, and we were going towards Ugledar, which had been liberated in September last year. So one of the commanders are saying, do you see those planes going west over there? That's where we're going. And it's not going to be very difficult for us. You know where we're going to be in summer? Dnipropetrovsk. Guess where they are now, George? They are on the borders of Dnipropetrovsk.
Well, they're about to take Sumy itself.
Take Sumy,
from
yes.
whence the Kursk incursion was organized. And that's 200 miles from Kiev itself.
Exactly, it's very close. Exactly. And the rationale now totally, it's completely different. Oh, we will keep advancing. When you have Lavrov saying on the record, I would say for a few months now, including this roundtable we had in the beginning of the week here, where you were on the panel, it will be decided in the battlefield. And now this is the number one priority for Russia. The second priority will be this ersatz negotiation with the Americans, because they don't exactly know what Trump wants, thinks, or if he's going to change his mind tomorrow, or what narrative he's going to change.
He's going to change his mind in the next hour.
In the next hour, literally, yes.
They were literally throwing bombs at not literally, but almost throwing bombs at each other, Musk and Trump, just a couple of days ago. Tonight, they've kissed and are making up.
They're making up.
I mean, it's a perfect picture of how unpredictable the American administration is. And unpredictability is a danger at the top of a nuclear arms.
Yeah, but the Russians look at all that like they are monks. No?
Yeah.
Impassible. Nothing distracts them from their ultimate goal.
That's a fact. Pepe Escobar, a real pleasure.
Enormous pleasure, George. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Against the bombers inside Russia, the airfields. Did that change your view at all of what Zelensky the cards he has?
Well, they gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of him last night. That's the thing I didn't like about it. When I saw it, I said, here we go.
There is some news on the Ukraine front that is, of course, not good. So remember a little over a week ago, Ukraine carries out the biggest ever swarm drone attack on multiple Russian airfields, claims over 40 aircraft damaged or destroyed deep inside Russia. These bases are 2,000 to 4,500 kilometers inside Russia. Now, the liberals were very happy about this. They took a big victory lap, acted like this was great news. The Atlantic magazine writes a piece. Ukraine's drone strikes deep into Russia delivered a humiliating blow to Moscow last weekend. Kiev's defenders celebrated the attack, but the extraordinary operation got a different response in the White House. Anger, writes Jonathan Lemire for The Atlantic. So Donald Trump was asked about this. This would have been on Saturday, June 7th. Here he is. This was posted to X. Here he is on the plane saying that actually this now gives Russia a reason to retaliate and escalate the war and make peace all the more difficult.
Ukraine. Did the Ukraine drone strikes against the bombers inside Russia, the airfields, did that change your view at all of what Zelensky, the cards he has?
Well, they gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of him last night. That's the thing I didn't like about it. When I saw it, I said, here we go. Now it's going to be a strike.
Here we go, indeed. What a naysayer. The Atlantic really upset that he would be so negative on Ukraine. But here you have it. June 7th, Kharkiv hit by most powerful attack of entire war, Mayor says, as Russia pounds Ukraine again. That was an accurate headline, but a short-lived one, because actually today was reported Russia launches biggest drone assault of the war. Ukraine says the attack used almost 500 drones and missiles, breaking a record set just days earlier as Russia tries to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses, which shot down most of the weapons. Russia launched almost 500 drones and missiles at Ukraine overnight, Ukrainian forces said on Monday, in the largest in a string of record-breaking aerial assaults as peace talks stall. Despite pressure from the Trump administration to work towards a ceasefire, Russia has been stepping up its large-scale barrages in recent months. That effort has further escalated since Ukraine mounted coordinated drone strikes, strategic bombers at air bases inside Russia on June 1st. While there were no reports of major damage and only one person was killed, the scale of Russia's aerial assault was the latest step in a campaign by Moscow to overwhelm and deplete Ukrainian air defenses, one with no end in sight given a lack of progress in peace negotiations. So Martha Raddatz is in Ukraine, and this is a little piece from Good Morning America, which aired earlier today.
Already 90,000 lives lost here in Ukraine, the picture of many of those behind me. And this week we have seen Ukraine pounded by Russia, setting records in this very year. But last night was a new record, nearly 500 drones and missiles launched all across Ukraine, the highest number in this entire war. Ukraine says the large majority of those were shot down or intercepted. Most were in the western part of the country where we are now, targeting a military airfield right near here. At least one person was killed and nearly a dozen injured. Last night, we were in Kyiv. Citizens had been warned there might be massive attacks. We spent the entire night in a bomb shelter. Of course, this comes in retaliation for the unprecedented Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian bombers. So this war is far from over. George.
That is so
far from over. Indeed, it seems that way. While mounting a new offensive on the ground in eastern Ukraine, Russia has been setting deadly records with the swarms of drones and missiles it launches at Ukraine, often hitting civilian targets in towns and cities across the country. Some records have lasted just a few days before being broken. As Russia has escalated aerial attacks, it has also been stepping up frontline assaults and has opened a new front in northeastern Ukraine. But Ukraine has continued to try to take the war to Russia, including with the attack on Russian air bases and with further drone strikes deep inside the country. The attacks came despite efforts by the Trump administration to cajole both sides towards a ceasefire. those talks have sputtered. The latest round of talks between the two sides earlier this month in Istanbul yielded little result apart from another agreement to swap prisoners. Speaking of efforts to cajole both sides, here is a little montage of candidate Trump promising to have this wrapped up within 24 hours. This posted January 1st, 2025.
You need 24 hours.
Yes, I
How
do.
would you do that?
I know Zelensky very well.
End that war between those two countries in 24 hours. It won't even take that long. I will get the war ended. I'll stop all of those lives from being wasted and lost. And there'll be no more bombing of Ukraine. There'll be no more bombing of Russia. And everybody will be happy.
It can be negotiated, I think, within 24 hours. It really has to be done from the office of the president. And you have to get them both in a room. And there are things you can say to each one of them, which I won't reveal now, which will guarantee that this war will end immediately.
And that to get it solved, I can do it in 24 hours. I know both players, and I can do that in 24 hours. But you can only do it from the office of the president. You need that. You need that seat. You need what's tailed in that seat. And I would have that done in 24 hours. It wouldn't even be tough. I know what to say to each of them, and there's no way they would reject it.
I would have a deal done in 24 hours from the time we started. And I would tell Zelensky something, and I would tell Putin something, and I'd get him into a room, and I'd tell him again and again. I would have a deal done very quickly.
That is a salesman, folks. Always be closing. Always be closing. Coffee is for closers only, baby. That is how you sell the sizzle, not the steak. You know, it's funny when he dressed down Zelensky in the Oval Office. It was so gratifying to watch. It was so cathartic to see that because we have been waiting to see that. And then, every Sunday night we have a Q&A after the show, and one of our patrons called in. I'll name drop him here since, Jimmy, he was a guest on your show once, RB Ham. And he calls in and he says, as nice as that was to see, I still don't think he knows how to end this war. I think at this point, the war is going to end when Putin wants it to end on his terms, because at this point, Russia has simply sacrificed too much to settle for what they were willing to settle for, not just at the outset of the war, but well into the war. Their demands were very simple: a neutral Ukraine, Crimea recognized as Russia, and independence for those eastern regions. And now they're going to want more because they have spilled a lot of blood. I mean, you have thousands of people die per week for this, and that Ukrainian strike earlier was the precursor for this. Trump warned about this on the airplane. He said, that's not good. That's not good. And the liberal media gave him a lot of shit. The Atlantic was just one of them. I mean, you saw in MSNBC, they were giddy about that attack as if Ukraine was back in the game. Yeah, they're not back in the game. This just drags it out even further. It really is just a horrible human tragedy, the carnage and the human cost of this war. Now it seems like, it does seem like peace is further away than it's ever been, thanks to this latest ratcheting up.
Yeah, well, now this seems to have just made it more likely that Russia is going to expand its territorial ambitions in Ukraine, perhaps even as it almost certainly never intended to do, actually reabsorb Ukraine back into Russia. I don't think that was ever their intention. All very early on, Boris Johnson went in there and sabotaged a peace deal that would have allowed, I think Putin wanted the eastern regions to be able to vote about whether they'd be autonomous, whether they'd be part of Russia, whether they'd be part of Ukraine, and no NATO. That was the real issue, no NATO. But when you look at Donald Trump and you look at Vladimir Putin, I mean, Donald Trump is a joke. Vladimir Putin, whatever you think of him morally, whatever you think of him as a leader, that is a very smart, strong, capable guy. This is somebody who survived the collapse of the Soviet Union and in basically a war of thieving oligarchs wound up rising to the top without getting whacked, right? Like this is a guy who basically won a mob war and has kept that country under his control for decades, in a country where only the strong survive in those positions.
That's right. Who's more tested, Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump, who beat Hillary and Kamala? And that's why he could get where he is, as opposed
Exactly.
to
I mean,
Vladimir Putin.
yeah, I mean that when you look at his interview with Tucker Carlson, a lot of people took exception to it. I'm not enough historian. I don't think most of us are to analyze. Well, no, in 1617, that's not what happened. But the fact that he gave this over an hour dissertation of Russian, can you imagine Donald Trump getting through 3 sentences?
Oh, you're talking about the
of that
Tucker
monologue?
interview. Yeah.
The Tucker interview. What did I
Yeah.
say? When
Maybe
he
you did
sat,
say it. I just, yeah.
he sat down with Tucker and getting into all these fine points of Russian history. And you know what? It's not just Putin. Like, this is a country that is not governed or frankly populated by serious people at this point. We are surviving on the fumes of past glories, and the people who run the country now are getting by on the accomplishments of previous generations and the remnants of what they established, the institutions and the power dynamics that they set up. But none of these people could ever accomplish those things for themselves. They're simply taking advantage of them, really, at looting them. And if you look at other leaders from around the world, even from small, tiny countries, they're dignified, they're articulate. Look at what we got. We're debating the big, beautiful bill. If that is not an infantilized culture, what is?
Yep.
All
Got
right.
anything, Jimmy?
No, I mean, I don't, I just don't. Do you know exactly what I mean, of course, Zelensky wants to drag this war out. Of course, the Atlantic does, the corporate media, because we're living in what Eisenhower warned us against,
Yes.
the undue influence of the military industrial complex. And so when Congress gets together, they're not doing the bidding of workers or students or the elderly or anybody except their donor class, which is right now the military industrial complex, Wall Street, big pharma, and the tech industry. So I don't, of course, they're all going to be happy about it. And that's also part of the looting of this country, that the people who are looting it own the media. And so the media tells the plebes, no, this war is good. And and when Donald Trump wants to ratchet it down, that's bad because he's in the pocket of Russia and Putin. And I mean, it's just the fact that people can't, I mean, I can kind of understand how people in America could still be so stupid after they've been lied to so many times about Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria. Now we have a legit Al Qaeda guy running Syria, and that was all our doing. And after they lied to them about Russiagate and lied to them about COVID and lied to them about Joe Biden being demented, they still go back to the same goddamn people and believe exactly what they say about Ukraine. It's mind numbing. It's mind bending but what I don't get is, when are the people in Ukraine going to revolt? When are they going to say enough of this? I mean, they've been dragging people off street corners.
Yeah, and that's hard.
Yeah.
It's absolutely horrible. And you know what I think is going to happen now is that all of these liberal pundits are now going to, because I think, Russ, you're probably right, that Putin is going to now expand his territorial ambitions, perhaps to even absorb all of Ukraine. And now these libs are going to say, we told you he was a madman on the march. Well, no, you pushed him into that, yes, by refusing to give up the fight when you had ample opportunity to. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, in terms of the libs, I must say, since Donald Trump got elected, they've been pretty shell-shocked. The one thing that really got their lib dudgeon up was that dressing down in the Oval Office of Zelensky, man. That was the one time you saw them come together as the old MSNBC coalition to wag their fingers and become outraged, which just shows you how much of our political conversation, it's just a psyop, man. It's just a psyop. It's not real. Most of it is not real. Yeah, you really care about Ukraine. Really. Like, stop and think about it for a second, Mr. MSNBC lib. Like, why do you care? Why do you really? One in 5 children in America lives in poverty. Why don't you care about that? Because nobody told you to.
That's right.
Nobody told you to. They told you to care about this. That's why you care.
That's right.
Exactly. It's TV.
Hey, have you ever tried getting ibuprofen?
Well, this is a story that is shocking to the core. So last year, we reported here on the show, and by the way, no one in the mainstream media covered this story at all. Zero. Not even the independent media covered this story at all, showing how Ukraine was refusing to pay the pensions of the fallen soldiers to their loved ones. Soldiers killed in action were labeled as missing so that the mothers and fathers who lost their sons wouldn't receive any of the death benefits. And then, of course, we showed you the protests and the moms on camera complaining about this, crying, asking for them to tell them information about their son. He's not really missing, is he? We know that he's dead. He's been killed, but you're labeling him as missing. Can you imagine a government so corrupt? That is the country of Ukraine, one of the most corrupt governments in the world. Their bodies dumped in mass graves. So the Ukrainians were dumped their own soldiers' bodies in mass graves, hidden, but then the government would label them as missing. This is true. And then, of course, missing means the families receive no money. And worse than the money, because money is one thing, they never get to visit the gravesite. They never get to honor their son. They never get to lay them to rest because Ukraine lied to them. Well, so this story hit a few days ago. And of course, you know, immediately people are like, oh, this is propaganda. This is Russian propaganda. Russia says it has been ready to hand over thousands of Ukrainian dead bodies that they'd gathered up from the field, kept in frozen containers so that they would preserve, so that the Ukrainians could then bury them themselves. They have tens of thousands of dead bodies, Ukrainian soldier bodies. Russia went to gather them up because Ukraine won't. And they put them in body bags, labeled them, kept them in frozen storage so Ukraine could bring them back and give them a proper burial so mothers could bury their sons. It's not pretty. This is war. And what did Ukraine's Zelensky government do? They just walked away from the dead, literally walked away from the dead, left their own soldiers dead in refrigerated trucks. This isn't propaganda. This isn't Russian spin. It's real. And it's now confirmed by Ukraine's own coordination headquarters for treatment of prisoners of war. So Ukraine has now confirmed it. Here's Ukraine. Today's statements by the Russian side do not correspond to reality and previous agreements, neither regarding the exchange of prisoners nor regarding the repatriation of bodies. Over the past week, teams from both sides have been working in two directions: repatriation of bodies, fallen servicemen, and exchange of prisoners. Regarding the exchange of prisoners, Ukraine had submitted lists for exchange. So basically, Ukraine is saying that, yes, this is true, but you didn't adhere to our lists. Like, we gave you lists and you didn't adhere to it. So yes, you provided all these dead Ukrainian bodies back, but you didn't follow our algorithms. They did confirm that an agreement had, in fact, been reached for the repatriation of dead bodies. But because Russia had allegedly acted unilaterally, didn't follow Ukraine's preferred algorithm, Ukraine basically walked away from the deal. So what happens when your government ghosts the process? This is what happens. This. Piles of Ukrainian soldiers frozen, abandoned.
Most of them stolen off
the
streets, not voluntarily enlisted.
Oh, yeah, that's another good point. These were a lot of these people
kidnapped Ukrainians.
Yeah, conscripted. Exactly, left to freeze. I mean, just look at these. These are the conscripted soldiers being gathered up and carried. So families left in limbo, mothers left to wonder right now if their sons are among the unclaimed dead or labeled as missing by Ukraine's corrupt government. I mean, I can't believe it, honestly. What government signs an agreement to bring back its fallen heroes and then complains about the format of the Excel spreadsheet and refuses to follow through on it. Ukraine says it was Russia's fault for acting outside the joint process. Sorry, but nobody cares about your bureaucratic bullshit when there are thousands of dead kids lying in trucks on the side of the road in a meat locker, essentially. But don't take our word for it. Ukraine's own Post says the deal was made. They admit the bodies should have come home. But instead of honoring the dead, they accuse Russia of manipulation and using humanitarian, this is their quote, using humanitarian topics for political purposes. How exactly is Russia manipulating Ukraine here? Like, here's your war dead. They're already dead. Like, we already beat you on the battlefield. Like, here, take them back, give them to the moms, so you can bury them. It's not political to want your dead son back. The only way I could see this being manipulation, honestly, is that if it forces Ukraine to not label these dead soldiers as missing, right? Because otherwise, they probably labeled them as missing beforehand. Now they're sort of being forced to say, oh, okay, we actually have them back now. We have to admit to the mom and dad that, in fact, they were killed in the line of duty, and now we have to pay them death benefits. So but that's a stretch. I don't buy that. Russia, for their part, says they're still trying to hand over the bodies, but they're waiting for Ukraine to take them. But Ukraine walked away. So these bodies still awaiting transportation. They're sitting in refrigerated trucks by the thousands until Ukraine does something about it. So you probably heard that RFK Jr., known for his sharp mind and relentless energy on the campaign trail, is taking methylene blue to stay focused, energized, mentally resilient.
The Russian press has called it a talk to discuss eliminating irritants, which I think means Ukraine. Like, basically, this is now our shared problem, is this mosquito problem that we have created, which is this thug of a government, which is Ukraine. Not the Ukrainian people, clearly the Ukrainian government. Well, now the U.S. is saying that it will reduce military aid to Ukraine in upcoming budgets. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that he didn't say stop. Listen for the words that he used. He used reduce. He said it's a reduction in this budget. This administration takes a very different view of that conflict. A negotiated peaceful settlement is in the best interest of both parties and our nation's interests, especially with all the competing interests around the globe. That's what he said on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, Congress, specifically the neocons in Congress, started freaking out. Clayton, if I just gave you who's the most war-loving Republican? No, I'm not going to give you that. Let's pretend I didn't give you that clue.
Okay.
Who's the most war-loving senator in Congress right now?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's close between a few of them, but I would definitely lean on Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham gets the Miss America title for War Lover of the Year. Absolutely. I want to give him a sash. I want to give him flowers and a crown. He loves it. He loves death.
And he would love high heels too. So
I'm sure he would. So here is him absolutely freaking out that we may not arm Ukraine anymore. Watch.
Is Putin going to stop in Ukraine?
I don't believe he is, sir. I think he'll
What do you
go
think?
until
What do you think, Secretary? Is he going to stop?
remains to be seen, Senator.
Well, he says he's not. I mean, this is the 30s all over. It doesn't remain to be seen. He tells everybody around what he wants to do. Are you familiar with his military buildup in terms of armaments?
All right. Okay,
It's
let's
well
stop
beyond
it.
what.
He really thinks. I told you, so clear. I just want to know, when did Putin say he wasn't going to stop at the border of Ukraine? It's worth remembering that Putin didn't authorize this war. Russian parliament did. He's making this up. It's another word for lying. And in fact, because we've been following this all along, Russian state media clearly defines the borders of this war. It has since the beginning. What you're looking at here is the red area that Russia has taken over from Ukraine since 2022. The dark gray is where they have said they will keep going until they reach. That's their definition of where they will stop. It's not hard, Lindsey Graham. That's not hard. So he's asking, where will it stop? Well, Russia's told us so. Are you looking? Do you care? The area in red voted to become Ukraine. The area up to the dark gray is where Ukraine has been attacking since 2014. And again, I want to point your attention to the dots. The red dots are where the Russian army is. And the blue dots are where the Ukrainian army is. What the heck is the Ukrainian army doing where at the top there, where the war is not? Why are we arming them to not be in war? I'm just wondering.
You have to attack Kursk, Belgorod, all of those other areas have nothing to do with it.
That's kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so why are they there? So they're lying to keep the war going. They assume you don't know any better. But you do because you study, otherwise you wouldn't come to Redacted. And according to the Associated Press, the U.S. has provided Ukraine more than $66 billion in aid since February of 2022. That figure is only direct aid packages voted on by Congress. It does not at all include the defense bills that Clayton has dug up. We've shown you that on Redacted. That puts that real number much, much higher than 66 billion. So do you think the people who have profited from this war will allow it to stop? Probably not. That's why Secretary Heggs has said reduction, not end, right? Meanwhile, Ukraine is already low on weapons. And if you think Europe is going to step in and pick up the slack, you're on glue. That's not going to happen. They don't have it. Will this push Ukrainian President Zelensky to a peace deal? Who knows? That fool is illogical. It depends how much he's had.
I mean, he won't even pick up his own
day.
bodies. So all these Ukrainian soldiers that were killed in Russian-controlled territory, which is now part of Russia, or even areas that are Russian-controlled, like you have all the bodies there. Return the bodies, and Zelensky won't even pick up his own war dead.
Right. So at the very least, let's reduce the guns and weapons and lethal, material. It's at least a strategic shift, signaling to Russia that, it's not really very genuine of us to call for peace with one side and then arm the other side with deadly weapons. That's not a winning diplomatic strategy. We've seen that play out. So there we go.
The United States and China just held two-day trade talks in London, talks that were hailed as a success. But the intriguing thing is how little either side said about the substance of what was agreed. Now, I think there's a very clear reason why that is likely to have been the case, and it indicates that President Trump just got one hell of a wake-up call. So, let's discuss. Back on April the 2nd, you will remember when Trump launched his major raft of tariffs against the entire world, one thing was absolutely clear in how he and his team spoke and subsequently behaved. That was that they were confident that they were in the position to bully the entire world because the strength of the US economy and the fact most countries had a strong trading relationship with it meant that they could inflict pain on everybody else and then strike hard bargains for them to stop doing so. Simple extortion, in other words. Not let's negotiate on trade and we can benefit and you can benefit and both of us end up better off at the end. No. That traditional trade logic, obviously, that's for wimps. No, more like have some of this pain. Hurts bad, right? What are you prepared to offer to us to stop inflicting it? Really? Is that all? Feel more pain. How about now? Or as Trump posted in April, the golden rule of negotiating and success. He who has the gold makes the rules. Some countries could absorb more pain than others, but the equation they believed was always the same. In Trump's mind, any pain for America would be slight and temporary, but the pain America could inflict on others was profound and enough to bring all of the weak leaders to come begging to him to strike a deal. Any deal. China told him to go hang and slapped reciprocal tariffs on the United States to match the ones that he'd imposed on them. They quickly raced to absurd highs and then they sat on them while their economies squirmed. And yes, China suffered significant pain, but somewhat less so than America had supposed they would. Trump's team had thought that China's exports would collapse and its currency would dive. But exports overall rose by 6%, even as they declined massively to America. That was thanks to increased shipments to Europe and Southeast Asia. And China's currency is stronger against the dollar now than it was before April the 2nd. But in addition to that, the truth was that China had a card in its pack that America was really, really vulnerable to. They just didn't know it yet. Now, as you probably know, that was the rare earths card, especially rare earths magnets, which are needed for a great many of the high-tech products produced by the United States. And not just cars and laptops and even Elon Musk's Optimus robots. China produces the entire world supply of a rare earths mineral called samarium. Samarium is a rare earth metal that is required, that the United States absolutely needs in order to build fighter jets, missiles, and other military hardware. That's because samarium produces heat-resistant magnets. They keep their magnetic properties even when exposed to temperatures that would be hot enough to melt lead, which standard rare earth magnets do not. On April the 4th, when China was announcing its increased trade tariffs as a response to Trump's unilateral attack on them, it also stopped the export of 7 strategically essential kinds of rare earth metals and magnets, including that one. Now, it took time. A bunch of overconfident and frankly arrogantly drunk on their own power Americans did not immediately really understand how big a deal that was. They thought they had tutored the world on how to strategically use trade policy to maximize the leverage you have over others while minimizing the pain on your own people. Well, they had no idea. After weeks of a trade standoff, with retailers like Walmart and Costco warning that soon prices would be rising in the stores, some of the shelves would be empty, they finally persuaded the Chinese to sit down with them for discussions. China had said in advance that substantive discussions could only take place once the new unilateral tariffs were removed. And basically, those first negotiations in Geneva agreed to do that, to remove those new tariffs. It seems as though the American side took it as read, that would include the non-tariff barriers and the rare earths would just start flowing again like water in exactly the quantities they had before. But they didn't. Some of them began to flow, but more constrained by a new licensing system and no samarium. Trump responded in the only way he knows how, bad-mouthing the Chinese, slapping new restrictions on them, banning Chinese student visas. And then finally, he and Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke by phone at Trump's request. And that led to this 2-day meeting in London. And you know what happened at that discussion? Well, we don't entirely know. A deal was clearly done to get the rare earths flowing again. We know that. But this was the negotiation that the United States went into where it did not hold the strongest cards. Countries that have spoken, usually off the record, about their trade negotiations with the Americans in the last couple of months have said that the US demands have been atrocious. The sorts of demands the bully makes of the victim when he knows the victim has few options but to comply, or at least he thinks so. Because to be fair, that's not been entirely working out so well for them, hence the complete absence of deals so far to date. But in this case, China knew they had the winning card. The Americans went in with a rude awakening that the other side had the winning card. And they have been somewhat coy about what was agreed. There is no complete readout of what was said. The Chinese side did a statement and it said almost nothing. The two sides reached principled agreement on implementing the important consensus reached by the two heads of state during their phone call on June the 5th, which would only tell you something if you had a detailed readout of what that phone call covered, which we don't. And also made new progress in addressing each other's economic and trade concerns. So new progress. Well, how interesting. What new progress? No details. There was stuff about how both countries should also, quote, make good use of the consultation mechanism, deepen consensus, reduce misunderstandings, and strengthen cooperation, which I read as saying, stop ambushing us with stupid, unilateral, punitive measures. Treat us with respect. The sort of thing you can demand when you're negotiating from a position of strength. The big Chinese complaint on the US has been that America tries to restrict China's access to advanced semiconductor chips to try to prevent them from being able to develop much of their own tech sector to match or even possibly surpass that of the United States. So the US isn't confident enough, obviously, to outcompete China. It tries to use a semi-monopoly position of its own to constrain China's ability to make progress. Now, companies like Huawei have made significant strides in progressing anyway, to America's slight startlement, but very much on the basis of necessity being the mother of invention and still very much constrained from what it might otherwise have been achieving. I am willing to bet that the new progress in addressing economic concerns means that China traded monopoly control over the elements that America desperately needs for the inputs that it seeks, that America has been denying them. Because it's the obvious play, and because China has the ability to walk away from the table and leave America to hang. They would be deeply compromised if China had done that. So believe me, they had to deal. But I can imagine that part of the deal came with conditions that it should not be publicized or promoted or connected to the agreement that those semiconductors were going to start becoming available. Trump had to be able to save face. Well, saving face is something the Chinese understand, even if they also know full well that Trump wouldn't extend it to them if he didn't have to. So when Trump finally did his, needless to say, all caps promo of what had been achieved, he led with full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. That's America's win, obviously. Likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to. Notice that phrase, how very un-Trumpian. What was agreed to. He then adds a couple of things that the US had slapped on China recently, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities. So it included, but was not restricted to those things. He then added, we are getting a total of 55% tariffs, China is getting 10% and so on, because that sounds like a win. He also added, President Xi and I are going to work closely together to open up China to American trade, which is just vaporware. Pre-announcing something that has no substance yet, the terms of which you can just speculate. So the gap is that what was agreed to, the bit that Trump felt he had to reference, but he didn't detail. Given that China went in as the strongest player, there is no doubt there was more substance than what he was giving. And given the real pain China has experienced with the semiconductors ban, and the fact that it's kind of a mirror image, except less extreme, of what they were able to inflict back with the rare earths, it's the obvious thing that China would have been able to achieve. Indeed, while the trade negotiators have been coy about what was agreed, Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, said in advance of the talks that he rather expected they would reach a deal that would include easing restrictions on selling chips to China. Our expectation is that immediately after the handshake, any export controls from the US will be eased and the rare earths will be released in volume. That was the first time that had been suggested that Trump was open to putting such controls onto the negotiating table. Bear in mind, the controls were initially brought in by the Biden administration, which had taken Trump's more generally confrontational position with China from his first term and then ran with it into new realms. So it would signal the end of an approach that started before Trump's second term. And all thanks to Trump's unilateral action to bully the world. Because until he did that, on April the 2nd, China was enduring a status quo that put them at a disadvantage and seemed to be carrying on with that. Maybe they would have made a move of this sort at some point, but Trump's breathtaking error of judgment made a radical pushback seem much more of a natural response. Trump's demonstrable incompetence in spite of his supporters chanting "art of the deal" whenever he does something that seems, shall we say, counterintuitive, also made it much more likely that they would do this because they figured that they would succeed. Now, the markets responded pretty moderately to the news of the agreement in London. Zheng YK, Chief Investment Officer of Shenki Asset Management in Hong Kong, he told Reuters the market likely anticipated this. Trump is just taco. As we know, none of Trump's team will tell him that such a thing has ever been said about him. So that's all right then.
I'm asking Congress to fund a state-of-the-art Golden Dome missile defense shield to protect our homeland, all made in the USA.
Now, Donald Trump has long said that he'd like a missile defense system similar to Israel's Iron Dome.
If the $175 billion missile defense shield is going to work the way he wants it to,
Has new technology that promises to make fighter jets invisible, silent, and more deadly. Chinese scientists have reportedly created new stealth technology that can take aircraft off the enemy radar.
Before the United States could even finish building its highly praised $175 billion Golden Dome missile defense system, China may have already found a way to break through it. The U.S. had high hopes for this defense shield, which former President Donald Trump called a major leap in national security. But just as the project is gaining attention, China is making quiet but powerful progress that could make all of America's efforts look weak and outdated. Today's episode will uncover China's development of a new stealth material that could easily destroy America's Golden Dome defense system. China has developed a new kind of material that improves the stealth of its aircraft and missiles. This special material helps Chinese military systems avoid detection from microwave and infrared tracking methods, which are commonly used in radar and surveillance. In simple terms, this means that American sensors, no matter how advanced, might not even see Chinese missiles coming until it's too late. The U.S. Golden Dome system is supposed to protect the country from threats coming from the sky, missiles, drones, and even potential weapons launched from space. It combines advanced technology from land, sea, and space platforms to create what Trump once described as a nearly unbreakable wall around the nation. In one of his speeches from the Oval Office, he said, "Golden Dome will protect our homeland, even if the missiles are launched from space." On paper, that sounds impressive. But what good is a shield if the enemy has already built weapons that can slip past it undetected? According to a 2025 report from the U.S. intelligence community, China already has the power to launch accurate long-distance attacks using conventional weapons. These attacks could target places close to the U.S. mainland, such as Guam, Hawaii, and Alaska. The report also said China might be working on new types of missiles that can travel across continents with non-nuclear warheads, meaning they could strike deep into the continental United States without triggering a nuclear response. That's a game changer. But here's where it gets even more serious. The Chinese military isn't just working on the weapons themselves. It is also focusing on how to make those weapons invisible to America's billion-dollar radar systems. And that's where this new stealth material comes in. The research, led by Professor Li Qiang from Zhejiang University, was published earlier this year. His team developed a new metasurface material that can hide military equipment from both microwave and infrared detection, even at extremely high temperatures. Normally, when missiles or hypersonic planes fly at high speeds, they heat up a lot due to engine exhaust and friction. Most stealth materials break down or become useless at such high temperatures, but not this one. This Chinese-developed material can keep working even when exposed to temperatures as high as 700 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than the inside of a pizza oven. And unlike older materials, it doesn't melt or lose its shape. This makes it perfect for missiles and hypersonic aircraft, which need to stay hidden while flying very fast. According to lab tests, this material reduces radiation fingerprints across several wavelength bands. This includes microwave frequencies and all three major types of infrared detection: shortwave, midwave, and longwave. The results were stunning. In one test, the radiation dropped by more than 37% in the shortwave band and over 63% in the midwave band at high temperatures. That means a missile using this coating would look much cooler and less visible to American sensors. So basically, if a missile can fly toward the US without being seen until the very last minute, or not seen at all, it makes most of the Golden Dome system useless. This isn't just a small improvement in stealth. This is a whole new level of invisibility that American defenses may not be ready for. This special material has multiple layers. On top, it's moisture resistant, which is great for all kinds of weather. On the bottom, it sticks well to the surface of aircraft or missiles. In between, it has a carefully designed layer that helps control how radar and heat waves bounce off or pass through. The radar signals are confused, and the heat signature is hidden. Imagine a chameleon in the sky, changing its appearance to remain invisible. That's how advanced this technology is. Ever since radar was invented, military powers have tried to beat it. America's F-22 Raptor, F-35 Lightning II, and B-2 stealth bomber all use shapes and coatings to avoid radar detection. These aircraft are covered in materials that absorb 70 to 80% of radar signals. In theory, this makes them as hard to detect as birds or small objects. But these materials have big problems. They are easily damaged by weather like salt and moisture, and they degrade at high temperatures, above 250 degrees Celsius. That's not even half of what China's new material can handle. Earlier this year, Chinese researchers surprised the world by using a technique from 3,000 years ago to solve a modern problem. They applied the ancient jacquard weaving method to create a new type of stealth fabric. This fabric uses conductive yarns and a double-sided pattern to absorb over 90% of radar waves in the 8 to 26 gigahertz range. That performance is better than most materials used today by Western militaries. A Chinese research team led by Professor Zhang Qian called it a marriage of ancient patterning and modern electromagnetism. Their results weren't just scientific, they were practical. This fabric lasts up to 18 months compared to America's 3-week lifespan, and the costs reduced by 75%. Once again, China is proving that it can solve military problems, not just with raw power, but with creativity, intelligence, and cost efficiency. Why is all of this important? Because defense is not just about building big systems like the Golden Dome. It's about keeping up with real-world threats and adapting to new technologies. The US has focused on building a large shield, but China has quietly worked on designing smarter, sharper arrows. And those arrows might already be too stealthy to stop. One of the biggest surprises is that this new stealth material isn't just about stealth, it's also about strength. Unlike older coatings that peel or crack easily, China's material is built to last. It's resistant to moisture, holds up under intense heat, and doesn't lose effectiveness even when laser etched for extra radar control. That's the kind of long-term reliability that militaries dream of. While America brags about its costly weapons and high-budget programs, China is finding smart ways to win without wasting money. The ancient weaving technique used in the stealth fabric isn't just clever. It shows how China can combine history, culture, and science to build tools that are practical and powerful. It's not just about high-tech machinery, it's also about deep-rooted innovation. What's even more exciting is that China's innovations don't stop with stealth materials. They're working on stealth drones, advanced satellite systems, and hypersonic glide vehicles, all of which could one day operate undetected in enemy territory. With this kind of stealth, these systems could fly right through the Golden Dome without setting off a single alarm. With much about China's development of a new stealth material that could easily destroy America's Golden Dome defense system covered, it is time to wrap this one up. If you have any topics in mind, comment below and we will cover them for you. As always, subscribe to never miss out. This is Race to Space, and we will see you in the next one.
Kofi, follow me.